Hey guys, tonight we embark on a journey that'll take us deep into the Viking winter, a place where temperatures plummet, the nights stretch on endlessly, and survival is a constant battle. You can feel the chill of the Nordic winds as they bite through your skin, and as you trudge through the snow, you hear the crunch beneath your boots. Now, picture yourself standing outside a Viking longhouse, the kind where families braved the harshest conditions. Can you imagine making it through one of these long, frozen nights? Yeah, you probably won't survive this without some solid Viking know-how. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I'd love to know. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Viking world during the winter months wasn't for the faint of heart. The North was unforgiving, a land of frigid temperatures, unrelenting snow, and pitch-black nights. It wasn't just the cold that made life so challenging. It was the extended darkness that came with the long winters. Imagine waking up in the morning and knowing that the daylight will only last a few hours, maybe 4 or 5 at most. By mid-afternoon, dusk would already be creeping in. The Vikings had to adapt quickly, especially if they hoped to survive, thrive, and even venture out into the unforgiving world. To survive such a climate, Vikings had to be tough. They had to be resilient, but they also had to be incredibly resourceful. In fact, without their ingenious survival tactics, their entire way of life could have been obliterated by the elements. They made the cold their ally, shaping the landscape of their lives in ways that allowed them to thrive when others might have perished. And the secret to their survival? Well, let's dive into the heart of it all: warmth. Vikings, at their core, were experts at making warmth. It wasn't just about fire, it was about creating warmth in every facet of their lives. If you've ever lived in a cold place, you'll know what I'm talking about. But Vikings had to do it with few resources, so they became masters of efficiency, making the most out of everything they had. A roaring fire, a sturdy lawn house, and shared efforts between community members. This was their answer to the freezing cold. So, when you find yourself wondering just how these hardy individuals made it through the coldest nights of the year, remember this: they didn't just survive, they thrived. They crafted their homes, their clothing, their food, and even their mindset to tackle the brutal conditions head on. And tonight, we're going to explore how they did it, step by step, night after night. The Viking world was far from the sunny, temperate climates you might think of when imagining ancient civilizations. The lands they called home, modern-day Scandinavia, were a landscape of jagged fjords, dense forests, and snow-covered plains. In winter, the daylight hours were brutally short, with only a faint glimpse of sun before it dipped back behind the horizon, leaving the world blanketed in darkness for weeks on end. The harsh winds and freezing temperatures made survival a daily struggle, and the very geography of the land itself presented its own challenges. Imagine stepping outside into this frozen landscape. The air stings your face, the wind bites at your skin, and every step you take leaves a deep imprint in the thick snow beneath you. The Vikings called these lands home, and for them, surviving the winter was more than just an inconvenience, it was a way of life. To make matters worse, the temperatures didn't just hover near freezing. They plummeted far below zero, sometimes reaching -30 degrees Celsius. making everything harder, from hunting to everyday tasks like gathering firewood. The cold was relentless, and the Vikings had to be constantly vigilant to avoid the risks that came with it. Hypothermia was a real danger, and frostbite could easily claim fingers, toes, or even limbs if you weren't careful. To survive the coldest nights, the Vikings needed more than just strength. They needed strategy. The first of these strategies was knowing their environment like the back of their hand. They learned to read the land, understand the weather patterns, and prepare for the inevitable snowstorms that would block roads and isolate villages for weeks. In the midst of this unforgiving environment, one thing stood out above all else: the Vikings' ability to adapt to the conditions. Their very home-slung houses were not just shelters, but carefully designed fortresses against the cold. Built from wood and thatched roofs, these longhouses had thick walls and low ceilings that minimized heat loss. But it wasn't just the architecture that kept them warm. It was the very structure of Viking society. Inside these longhouses, families didn't just live together, they huddled together. Space was scarce and warmth was precious. The central hearth, a fire pit at the heart of the home, was the main source of heat, cooking, and light. The fire served as a constant reminder of the Vikings' resilience, a way for them to hold onto a piece of warmth in the middle of the winter's brutal embrace. But it wasn't just the hearth that mattered, it was the people around it. Every family member, every guest, and every Viking that entered those longhouses contributed to the warmth of the place, whether through physical presence or through the sharing of resources like firewood. Historians still argue about the exact architectural techniques the Vikings used to make their homes so efficient. Some suggest that they used animal hides and furs to insulate the walls, while others believe they packed their homes with straw and clay to keep the cold out. What's clear, though, is that the Vikings knew how to create warmth in the most efficient way possible. Their longhouses weren't just homes. They were a testament to their understanding of their environment. In the next few sections, we'll explore how Vikings, against all odds, used what they had at their disposal to survive and thrive in the bitter cold. From clothing to food, fire to shelter, the Vikings developed methods that have withstood the test of time, and will uncover each one in turn. So, let's continue down this chilling journey into the Viking night, as we learn about the resources they used to ensure their survival. To survive the coldest nights of the Viking winter, one of the most crucial tools in their arsenal was, without a doubt, their clothing. Now, imagine yourself pulling on thick, heavy woolen socks and layering up in furs, leather, and wool, knowing that each piece is a vital barrier between your body and the freezing cold. Viking clothing was not about style, it was about survival. They didn't have the luxury of choosing fabrics for looks or fashion. They had to rely on materials that would keep them warm, dry, and protected from the elements. Viking clothing was layered, practical, and often made from materials readily available in their environment. The most common fabric used was wool, which the Vikings spun from sheep's fleece. Wool was highly prized for its ability to insulate even when wet, unlike cotton, which would become cold and uncomfortable once damp wool traps air between its fibers, keeping warmth close to the body. Woolen tunics and cloaks were worn over linen shirts, and woolen leggings provided warmth for the legs. They also wore thick woolen socks, often tucked into boots lined with fur to keep their feet toasty. But the real warmth came from the fur and leather. The Vikings didn't just rely on wool for their clothing. They made good use of the animals that roamed their lands. Furs from reindeer, foxes, and wolves were used to line cloaks, hats, and mittens. Leather boots kept the snow and ice at bay, while furs wrapped around the shoulders offered insulation from the bitter winds. These animal skins were a symbol of Viking ingenuity. They weren't just for decoration, but vital for survival. Imagine being bundled up in a thick, fur-lined cloak, feeling the warmth from the animal pelts as they cocoon you against the frigid air. Historians still debate whether the Vikings used any sort of underwear or long johns. Some speculate that Viking men and women wore simple linen undergarments as an additional layer for warmth. Others believe that Vikings may have made do without them, relying purely on their wool and fur layers. Regardless of their exact layering techniques, it's clear that clothing was essential for enduring the harsh winters. No Viking would venture outside without proper clothing, as the dangers of frostbite and hypothermia were ever present. Yet, clothing alone wasn't enough. The Vikings had to go beyond just covering their skin. They had to keep themselves dry. In such a wet and cold climate, getting wet was almost as dangerous as the cold itself. Vikings used animal fats, like tallow, to treat their clothing, making it more water-resistant. This allowed them to keep dry, even in snowstorms or heavy rain. Their boots, lined with fur, were also waterproof, keeping their feet dry and warm, even as they trudged through slushy snow and icy conditions. As if this wasn't enough, Vikings also wore practical accessories to enhance their clothing. Gloves, mittens, and head coverings were often made of the same materials as their coats: wool, fur, and leather. They even wore hoods and capes, designed to protect their faces and necks from biting winds. A Viking eskier wasn't just functionally was the difference between life and death on the coldest nights. They didn't take clothing lightly, as it was their armor against nature itself. The Vikings' clothing, however, was only one part of their survival strategy. You see, surviving winter wasn't just about what you wore, it was also about what you ate. As essential as the clothes on their backs, food was another fundamental pillar of Viking winter survival. The long, dark nights of winter meant that fresh food was in short supply, so the Vikings had to be clever about how they preserved their food to ensure they could make it through the long, freezing months. But that's a story for another time. For now, think about the practicality and resilience of Viking clothing. Picture yourself in that heavy, fur-lined cloak, stepping into the night with warmth surrounding you. The bitter cold may be all around, but with Viking ingenuity, you'd be ready to face it head-on. Now, let's talk about the Vikings' secret weapon in the battle against the cold fire. When you're standing in the middle of a snowstorm, it's not just warmth you crave. It's that flickering glow that brings a sense of life to an otherwise frozen world. For the Vikings, fire wasn't just about staying warm. It was the lifeblood of their existence during the long, cold nights. From cooking meals to warding off the chill of the dark, fire was indispensable. Without it, survival would have been near impossible. To create fire in such a harsh environment wasn't easy. Vikings didn't have matches or lighters like we do today. They relied on flint and steel to spark a flame, a method that's been used for thousands of years. Imagine striking flint against steel, the sparks flying through the air, landing on tinder that, with patience and skill, would catch the flame. In the wild, Vikings would often carry a fire starter kit, a piece of flint, a steel striker, and dry moss or birch bark to catch the spark. This fire-making process wasn't just a convenience, it was a skill vital to their survival. But fire wasn't only about striking a spark in the wild. The Vikings had fire at the center of their homes, specifically in their hearths. The hearth was the heart of the Viking longhouse, and not just for cooking. It was where families gathered, where heat was generated, and where light flickered in the otherwise dark house. These fires burned all night, every night, to ensure that the Vikings could survive the freezing temperatures. The longhouse fire was special, not just because it kept them warm, but because it was a symbol of communal living. The hearth wasn't just a private affair. The flames belonged to everyone in the house, from the patriarch and matriarch to the children and guests. Everyone contributed to maintaining the fire. Firewood had to be gathered and stored in preparation for the winter months, and each person played a part in keeping the hearth alive. But maintaining that fire wasn't always as simple as it seemed. In Viking times, especially during the harsh winters, fire could easily go out. If that happened, it wasn't just a minor inconvenience, it could spell disaster. A longhouse without a fire was uninhabitable. Vikings would have had a variety of techniques to keep the fire going during the night. They would use wood that burned slowly and evenly, such as oak or beech, which provided a steady heat. In some homes, the hearth had a system of chimneys or flues to carry smoke out of the house and prevent the air from getting too stifling. But for the most part, Viking longhouses didn't have the luxury of modern stoves and fireplaces with airtight seals. Instead, they relied on the natural flow of air to keep the fire burning. The fire wasn't just about heat, it was also a means of cooking. Vikings often cooked their meals over the hearth, slow cooking stews, roasting meats, and boiling grains. The fire was their stove, their heater, and their light source, all in one. Historians still debate the exact size and shape of Viking hearths, and whether they were centralized or placed at the far end of the longhouse. Some argue that larger longhouses had multiple fires going at once, while others claim the Vikings were more economical and used a single hearth for the entire family. Regardless, it's clear that fire was crucial for survival in the Viking world. Without fire, their clothes wouldn't dry, their food wouldn't cook, and their homes wouldn't stay warm. And even with fire, the Vikings still faced the daunting task of surviving the brutal cold. In the wilderness, Vikings also relied on fire for a more strategic reason: warmth on the go. Traveling during the winter was no easy task. Vikings often journeyed on long expeditions, braving snowstorms, freezing rivers, and unpredictable terrain. They had to carry fire with them to survive on the road. In fact, many Vikings would carry fire-starting kits on their journeys, and if they got stuck outside overnight, they knew how to build a fire in the snow or during a storm. Fire wasn't just something they used to survive the winter. It was a lifeline they carried with them wherever they went. As we move further into this story of Viking survival, we'll start to see just how important fire truly was. It wasn't just a tool, it was an essential piece of Viking life. But fire alone wasn't enough to ensure survival. Vikings had to eat, and their diet was just as critical for getting through the long nights. So, let us explore how they kept their bellies full and their bodies fueled for the fight against the cold. Now, imagine you're inside one of those Viking longhouses, the warmth from the central hearth wrapping around you like a comforting blanket. But the heat alone isn't enough to sustain you during the cold winter months. You need food, plentiful food that will fuel your body through the long, dark nights. For the Vikings, the key to surviving these harsh conditions was untied just in what they ate. It was how they preserved their food to ensure they could make it through the frigid months ahead. The Vikings were masters of food preservation. They didn't have refrigeration or modern canning techniques, so they had to rely on nature's methods. They salted, smoked, dried, and fermented their food to keep it from spoiling. One of their most important preserved foods was fish. Salted cod, herring, and other fish were staples of the Viking diet. Fish was abundant in Scandinavia, and the Vikings made sure to take full advantage of it. By salting and drying fish, they ensured they would have a constant supply of protein throughout the winter, even when fresh food was scarce. This preservation method also made it easy to transport fish on long journeys or expeditions. Meat, too, was preserved through smoking and salting. Vikings often slaughtered their animals in the fall, ensuring they had enough meat to last through the winter months. The meat was salted, smoked, or dried to keep it from spoiling. Pork, lamb, and beef were all common meats. But the Vikings also relied on more unusual animals, like reindeer, for sustenance. These preserved meats were eaten throughout the winter, in stews, soups, and even on their own. In addition to meat and fish, the Vikings also preserved vegetables and grains. Root vegetables, such as carrots, turnips, and parsnips, could be stored for months, and grains like barley and oats were dried and kept in large sacks. They made bread from these grains, which was often supplemented with the fish or meat they had preserved. Grain also played a significant role in the production of porridge, which was a staple breakfast for many Vikings during the winter. One of the more unusual but crucial aspects of Viking food preservation was fermentation. Fermented foods, such as sauerkraut, were common among Vikings, who understood that the process could help preserve vegetables for long periods of time. Dairy was also fermented into cheeses and yogurt-like products, which provided vital nutrients during the winter months when fresh milk was hard to come by. Fermented foods not only helped preserve food, they also helped with digestion, which was crucial when eating large amounts of preserved meats and fish. Historians still argue over how much Vikings relied on fermented foods versus other methods of preservation. Some believe that fermentation was a more common method, while others suggest that smoking and drying were the primary techniques. Either way, what's clear is that food preservation was an art form for the Vikings. Without it, they wouldn't have been able to survive the long winters in the unforgiving north. But it wasn't just preserved food that kept the Vikings going during the cold months. They had a unique way of eating that also helped them stay warm. Vikings often ate hearty meals that were rich in fats and proteins, which helped sustain them through the cold. Fat, in particular, was essential. It provided a high energy yield, and the Vikings knew how to cook their food with generous amounts of butter, lard, and animal fats. This kept them full and provided the fuel they needed to stay warm during the long, cold nights. Viking meals were typically simple, yet nourishing. Porridges made from oats or barley, rich stews, and roasted meats were staples of their diet. These meals were often cooked over the hearth, with the family gathering around to share food and warmth. The act of eating wasn't just about sustenance, it was about community. Sharing a meal around the fire was an essential part of Viking social life, and it helped strengthen the bonds between family members and neighbors alike. In the winter, when the cold winds howled outside, these shared meals provided not only warmth, but also a sense of connection and comfort. But the Vikings didn't only rely on what they could preserve. They also had to be resourceful, making the most of what the environment offered them, even in the dead of winter. So, let's take a look at how they did this, and how they adapted their diets to make sure they could keep going, no matter how cold the night got. If you've ever found yourself at a dinner table, warming your hands around a steaming bowl of stew, you can probably imagine how important it was for the Vikings to have their hearths stocked with food. But their true genius lay in how they turned what the environment provided into a rich and varied diet, even when the coldest nights of the year seemed to last forever. Let's take a moment to appreciate just how well they understood their surroundings. The Vikings didn't just survive the brutal cold, they made the cold work for them. They didn't have modern conveniences like supermarkets or imported goods, but what they did have was an intimate knowledge of their natural environment, from the coastal waters to the northern forests. They knew how to gather, hunt, fish, and forage for the resources that would get them through winter, and they adapted their diets to ensure they could keep their energy up, even when the world outside their longhouses was frozen solid. One of the more surprising aspects of Viking survival was their access to seafood. Although it might seem like a summer food, fish and shellfish were crucial to the Viking diet all year round. The cold waters around Scandinavia were teeming with fish. Smoked herring, pickled cod, and dried salmon were common winter meals. While the sea provided a steady supply of fish, the Vikings were equally adept at utilizing what they found on land. Reindeer, wild boar, and even bears were hunted for their meat, which was then salted or dried for preservation. But perhaps the most essential animal in their winter diet was the pig. Pigs were kept on farms and were slaughtered in late fall. Historians still debate the extent to which the Vikings relied on domesticated animals versus wild game. Some argue that wild game was the preferred source of meat, while others suggest that the Vikings were more dependent on their livestock. What's clear is that they didn't waste anything. They used every part of the animals they hunted or raised, from the meat to the bones, and even the hides. Every bit of an animal had a purpose, whether for food, clothing, or tools. But what about vegetables? Surely, winter's long darkness didn't leave much time for farming. Your right growing fresh vegetables in the dead of winter wasn't feasible. However, the Vikings knew how to work with what they had, ensuring they had a stockpile to get them through the winter months. These hardy vegetables could be stored in cool, dry places and would last for months. A typical Viking breakfast might have been a hearty bowl of porridge, made from barley and topped with dried berries, or a dollop of butter. This would keep them going for hours, providing the energy they needed to brave the cold. They also used their grain for brewing, creating the famous Viking ale. But as much as the Vikings relied on their preserved food and the bounty of the land, they also turned to another source of sustenance: fermentation. You might not associate fermented foods with Vikings. Fermentation also helped preserve food for the long winter, ensuring that even when fresh supplies were limited, the Vikings had enough to eat. Vikings had enough variety in their diet to stay healthy and strong during the darkest months of the year. So, next time you open a jar of pickles or enjoy a bit of fermented cheese, remember that this ancient practice helped the Vikings survive the harshest winters in history. While the Viking diet was certainly a critical factor in surviving the bitter cold, It was their homes, their shelters, that truly defined their winter survival. The longhouse, with its thick walls and low, protective roof, was much more than just a place to live. It was a fortress against the cold. And when you're facing sub-zero temperatures for months on end, a well-designed home can make all the difference. Built with wood, thatch, and animal hides, longhouses were large structures that housed extended families and sometimes even guests. These homes were designed to withstand the harsh elements of the Scandinavian winter. Inside, the floors were often covered with straw or animal skins, which provided insulation from the cold ground. These simple but effective designs ensured that the Vikings could stay warm, even when the temperature outside was plunging to freezing or below. The walls of the house were built with thick beams, and the space between the beams was filled with materials like straw, mud, and animal dung, natural insulators that helped trap heat inside. The roof, while often made of thatch, was covered with a layer of sod, which added an extra layer of insulation to keep the cold at bay. This combination of building materials, along with the tight, compact layout of the home, allowed the Vikings to trap heat more effectively than many modern homes would be able to do without central heating. The Viking longhouse didn't just provide physical warmth, it was the center of social and communal life. Families would gather around the hearth to share meals, tell stories, and warm themselves by the fire. The central hearth was more than just a source of heat, it was also a source of light. During the long, dark nights of winter, the fire flickered in the middle of the room, casting a soft glow that illuminated the faces of the people huddled around it. This was the Viking version of cozy, and it was essential for survival during the cold, dark months. Historians often point out that the longhouse was more than just a dwelling, it was the heart of Viking society. The hearth was where decisions were made, where warriors prepared for battle, and where families gathered after a long day's work. The fire was symbolic of life itself, a constant presence that provided warmth, light, and a sense of community in the midst of the darkest, coldest nights. Yet, even the most robust longhouse couldn't entirely protect against the freezing cold if the fire went out. Keeping the fire burning through the long nights was an essential part of Viking survival. This wasn't as simple as just lighting a match. Vikings relied on the same fire-starting techniques used by their ancestors: flint and steel, fire-starting kits, and dry tinder collected from the surrounding forest. And just like the fire in the hearth, the work to keep it going was a communal effort. Everyone had a part to play, whether it was gathering firewood, tending to the flames, or adding fresh fuel to the fire when it started to burn low. The Vikings also had another clever trick up their sleeves when it came to warmth: animal skins. The furs of reindeer, foxes, and wolves were used not just for clothing, but also as bedding and additional insulation. Sleeping under a pile of furs on top of a straw mattress, Vikings could preserve their body heat even in the coldest weather. These furs acted as thermal blankets, trapping warmth close to the body and preventing the cold from seeping in. And when the fire didn't quite keep the chill away at night, the extra layers of fur and wool ensured the Vikings could sleep through the long nights without freezing. This use of animal skins wasn't just about comfort, it was a matter of survival. In fact, the Vikings were incredibly resourceful when it came to using the resources around them. They didn't just kill animals for food. They used every part of the animal, from the meat to the bones, the fur to the sinew. Nothing went to waste, and each part of the animal had a specific purpose. The Vikings were keenly aware that every piece of fur, every bit of bone, and every piece of leather could mean the difference between survival and death as we move through the cold, dark winter of Viking life. It's clear that warmth was more than just a luxury, it was the very foundation of their survival. But the Vikings weren't just surviving, they were thriving, using the tools at their disposal to adapt to their environment and make it work for them. Whether it was through clever insulation, shared communal efforts, or their resilient spirit, they had everything they needed to endure the coldest nights. By now, you restarting to get a picture of how the Vikings battled the cold with their innovative solutions, from clothing to food preservation to the design of their long. But there's still one critical piece of the puzzle that kept them alive during the bitterest winters: their ability to generate heat and stay warm during the harshest nights. While fire, clothing, and insulation were essential to survival, Vikings also relied on something else to stay warm: activity. And I'm not talking about modern workouts or gym sessions. The Vikings had a deep connection with their environment, and their daily tasks were intertwined with maintaining their warmth. Physical labor wasn't just about getting things done, it was about ensuring their bodies remained active and warm. One of the most important tasks that kept them moving and, consequently, kept them warm was the need to gather fuel for the fire. Vikings would often spend hours cutting firewood, gathering dry logs, and hauling them back to the longhouse. But firewood wasn't just an afterthought. It was essential for both survival and comfort. Chopping wood kept the Vikings physically active, which was crucial when temperatures dipped so low. By constantly being on the move, they generated body heat, staving off the cold and preventing their muscles from stiffening up in the sub-zero conditions. Beyond gathering wood, the Vikings also engaged in other types of physical labor that helped maintain warmth. Farming and animal husbandry didn't stop just because the snow was falling. They continued tending to their livestock throughout the winter, feeding and caring for animals like cattle, sheep, and goats. But these chores weren't just about providing food. They also provided the Vikings with a constant source of movement and physical warmth. The act of caring for animals, bringing in fresh straw for bedding, and even making sure the animals were warm, kept the Vikings from sitting idle in the freezing cold. Even though the days were shorter and the nights were longer, the Vikings still managed to keep busy. The colder months were a time for working indoors, whether that was crafting tools, repairing weapons, or weaving textiles. Work was a communal affair in the longhouse, and when one person worked, others often joined in. The act of spinning wool, sewing clothes, or even making weapons for the next season's battles meant there was constant movement, and that kept their blood circulating. It wasn't just about staying warm physically, it was about staying mentally engaged, something that helped stave off the boredom and mental fatigue that often accompanied the long, dark winters. Historians still debate the extent to which Vikings worked during the winter months. Some believe that Viking society slowed down significantly when the snow piled up, while others argue that their work ethic never ceased, even in the coldest periods. What we do know is that physical activity, whether it was hunting, gathering, crafting, or caring for animals, was a critical part of surviving the winter. By keeping their bodies moving, Vikings were able to stay warmer for longer periods and avoid the dangers of freezing temperatures. But it wasn't just physical labor that kept them warm. They also understood the importance of rest and recuperation. While their daily tasks helped them stay active, They knew the value of sleep and conserving energy when it was necessary. In the longhouse, sleeping close together provided warmth through body heat, with multiple family members huddled together beneath layers of fur and wool. This wasn't just a way to save space. It was a practical solution to keeping warm. Imagine the difference between a single person in a bed and a group of people all generating body heat in close quarters. This communal sleeping arrangement helped the Vikings conserve energy, allowing them to rest without being exposed to the bitter cold. The winter was also a time for the Vikings to bond and share stories. In a way, this social interaction had its own warm effect. And let's not forget that laughter can be a great way to warm up too. The act of sitting together, sharing a meal, and laughing at stories or jokes helped the Vikings push through the long hours of darkness. Looking at their lifestyles, it's clear the Vikings didn't just survive winter. They used it as an opportunity to adapt and grow. They found warmth not only in their clothing and food, but in their ability to keep moving, stay active, and keep their spirits up. As we move forward, we'll see how the Vikings took their ingenuity to the next level. They didn't just rely on traditional knowledge. They adapted their methods to deal with the challenges of winter in the most creative ways imaginable. As we continue our journey through Viking winter survival, let us take a step back and consider something that is often overlooked when we think about cold weather. The Vikings' ability to manage the darkness. We've all experienced those long, dreary nights during winter, but for the Vikings, the endless hours of darkness posed a real challenge to their physical and mental well-being. After all, if the days are short and the nights are long, you can just rely on the sun to guide your way or give you the energy to keep going. So, how did the Vikings cope with the long, cold, and dark nights? The answer, in part, lies in their understanding of light and how it can combat the mental strain of darkness. While today we have streetlights, lamps, and electronic devices to keep us engaged, the Vikings had far fewer options. The most obvious solution was fire, of course, which we've already discussed. But fire wasn't just a source of warmth, it was also a source of light. And in the Viking world, light wasn't just functional, it was also a source of comfort and security. Picture yourself sitting in the longhouse, surrounded by the soft glow of the firelight. The flames dance in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls, and the heat from the fire wraps around you like a protective cocoon. But the fire isn't just providing warmth, it's creating light in the darkest part of your world. This light is a lifeline. The Vikings spent their nights around the hearth, gathered together as a community, sharing stories, eating, and even working. The fire was more than just a utility. It was a symbol of life itself, of warmth and connection in the middle of the darkest, coldest months. For the Vikings, light was also an important part of their daily rituals. They used oil lamps, often made from wood or stone, to light their homes and workspaces. These lamps would burn animal fat or vegetable oil, and the flame provided light in the longhouse during the night. In a society that spent so much time in the dark, the Vikings were incredibly resourceful when it came to finding ways to generate light. But while fire was the primary light source, it wasn't the only one. The Vikings also understood the importance of the natural light they had. When the days grew shorter and shorter, it was important for them to make the most of whatever sunlight they did get. Vikings would wake up early in the morning to take advantage of the brief daylight hours. And when the sun did shine, even for a short time, the Vikings would go about their work with a renewed sense of purpose. The short bursts of sunlight were cherished, providing both warmth and a psychological boost that helped the Vikings get through the seemingly endless nights. Historians still debate how much the Vikings relied on sunlight during the winter months for practical purposes, like hunting or gathering. It's clear that they adapted their activities to the rhythms of nature, making the most of whatever daylight they had. Some suggest that during the darkest parts of winter, Vikings would stay inside more, focusing on indoor activities like weaving, crafting, and tending to their animals. Others argue that even in the coldest months, Vikings remained active outdoors, taking advantage of the small amount of daylight for necessary tasks. Whatever the exact practices were, it's clear that the Vikings were keenly aware of the power of light and how it affected their survival during the long, dark winter nights. Light and warmth were essential not only for survival, but for maintaining a sense of normalcy. The Vikings were not just warriors, they were farmers, builders, and craftspeople. They had families to care for, animals to tend, and crops to harvest in the fall. While the winter months might have slowed down some of their activities, it didn't stop their community from functioning. The longhouse wasn't just a shelter, it was a hub of activity, a place where people came together, not just for warmth, but for connection. The light from the hearth and the flickering lamps was a constant reminder that even in the harshest conditions, the Vikings could endure. But the Vikings didn't just rely on fire and natural light to get through the long winter nights. They also had something else that helped them stay warm, active, and mentally sharp each other. The community aspect of Viking life was absolutely essential for survival. In such a harsh environment, they needed each other to survive. Whether it was sharing food, keeping the fire alive, or simply offering companionship, the Vikings knew that strength came in numbers. And, as we've seen before, this communal way of life was a cornerstone of their winter survival strategy. As we continue exploring the Viking world, it's clear that the elements of survival weren't just about physical tools and techniques. They were deeply rooted in the Viking mindset. They understood how important it was to stay connected to each other, to stay active, and to keep their spirits up even in the coldest, darkest nights. And this sense of community, this unshakable bond, was what allowed the Vikings to make it through the harshest winters known to humanity. As we've already seen, the Viking response to the cold wasn't just about surviving the elements. It was about adapting their entire way of life to thrive in the harshest conditions imaginable. The Vikings didn't just huddle around the fire to stay warm. They built an entire culture, a way of life, around their ability to endure the cold. But it wasn't just their homes, their clothing, or their food preservation techniques that allowed them to survive winter. It was their ingenious innovations and their unyielding resourcefulness that set them apart from other civilizations. One of the most striking examples of Viking ingenuity in the face of the cold was their approach to shelter. The longhouse, with its thick wooden walls, animal skin insulation, and thatched roofs, was a marvel of design, built to withstand the brutal Scandinavian winters. But the Vikings didn't stop there. Their architectural innovations extended to their ability to build homes that were warm in more than just a physical sense. They created a space that was designed to foster the warmth of community. The Viking longhouse was constructed in a way that encouraged communal living, and that communal structure was an integral part of their winter survival strategy. The longhouse wasn't just a roof over their heads, it was a social hub, a place for people to gather and share not only food and warmth, but knowledge, ideas, and support. This sense of community was essential during the long, cold months. While the fire in the hearth kept the longhouse warm, it was the people gathered around it that truly brought it to life. But even beyond the walls of the longhouse, Vikings had a way of using their environment to their advantage. They were excellent at hunting and trapping animals, not just for food, but for materials that could be used for clothing, shelter, and tools. The Vikings were known for their skill in using animal pelts and hides to create everything from boots and gloves to bedding and blankets. They didn't just kill animals for meat. They used every part of the animal to help them survive. The fur-lined cloaks they wore, the hides they slept on, and the leather boots they strapped to their feet were all products of their resourcefulness. Their understanding of the natural world didn't end with hunting and trapping, though. The Vikings also mastered the art of fishing, which was essential for both sustenance and trade. Fishing wasn't just a means of catching food, it was a way of connecting with the wider world. Fish were often salted, smoked, or dried to ensure a steady supply throughout the winter months. The Vikings were exceptional fishermen, and they knew how to work with the seasons to gather enough food to carry them through the coldest parts of the year. And in some cases, fishing wasn't just about the food. They also used fish as a trade commodity, exchanging it with other cultures to acquire goods and resources that they couldn't produce themselves. As much as the Vikings relied on the resources around them, they also knew how to use their surroundings for warmth and shelter in ways that other civilizations simply couldn't. One such example is their use of heated stone beds. In Viking homes, large stones were often heated by the fire and then placed in special beds or pits, where they would provide heat throughout the night. These heated stone beds were a luxury, but they helped Vikings stay warm even during the coldest nights, especially when the fire in the hearth wasn't enough to combat the chill. These innovations weren't just about comfort, they were about survival. The Vikings had to be as resourceful and creative as possible to make it through the darkest, coldest months of the year. Historians still debate how the Vikings came up with some of their more ingenious survival techniques. Some scholars argue that their use of heated stones for warmth was inspired by similar practices from other ancient cultures, while others believe the Vikings developed their own methods independently. Whatever the case may be, it's clear that the Vikings were pioneers when it came to adapting their surroundings to meet their needs. While these innovations certainly helped them endure the cold, the Vikings' unshakable mindset also played a vital role in their survival. Their resilience, determination, and unwavering belief that they could conquer any challenge were just as important as their tools and techniques. The Vikings didn't just face the cold with their physical resources, they faced it with an unyielding spirit. It was this mental toughness that allowed them to thrive in conditions that would have driven most people to despair. As we continue to explore the Viking world, we'll see how this spirit of innovation, combined with their resourcefulness and sense of community, allowed them to not just survive, but to conquer the cold and make it their ally. The Vikings may have faced some of the harshest conditions on Earth, but through their determination, they turned the coldest nights into an opportunity for growth, ingenuity, and survival. Let us take a moment to dive into another fascinating aspect of Viking survival during the coldest nights of the year: their incredible adaptability. As we've already seen, the Vikings were experts at using fire, clothing, food, and shelter to withstand the harsh winter. But their adaptability went far beyond these practical tools. Their mental and social resilience played just as important a role in their survival. In the Viking world, surviving the cold wasn't just about physical resources, was also about the mental strength to endure. The Vikings didn't just accept the winter as an inevitable hardship, they embraced it, using their ingenuity to turn even the darkest, coldest months into a time of productivity and community. They had a unique mindset that allowed them to push through not just the literal cold, but also the psychological challenges that came with months of isolation, darkness, and freezing temperatures. Historians still debate how much of this mentality was influenced by their pagan beliefs, but there is no question that Viking mythology played a central role in shaping their view of the winter months. The cold wasn't just a physical threat, was also a spiritual one. The Vikings believed in gods who governed not only the natural world, but also the harsh elements. For instance, Ullr, the god of winter, was thought to preside over the snowy, icy months. But rather than seeing winter as something to fear, the Vikings honored Ullr and other gods during this time, forging a connection with the land and the elements that helped them face the challenges of winter. While many cultures view winter as a time of hibernation or retreat, the Vikings saw it as an opportunity for different kinds of work. During the long nights, they would gather around the hearth, telling stories, making plans, and reflecting on their past achievements. This communal gathering was vital, not just for physical warmth, but also for maintaining their mental health. Socializing around the fire, even in the darkest months, helped reinforce bonds of family and friendship. It was this tight-knit, supportive community that kept spirits high, even as the cold tried to drive people apart. This sense of community wasn't just a luxury, it was a necessity for survival. In the Viking world, people depended on each other to get through the winter. It wasn't enough for individuals to merely rely on their own resources and ingenuity. They needed to work together, whether it was sharing firewood, looking after each other's children, or joining forces to hunt. The Vikings knew that survival depended on collaboration. They had learned that the coldest nights could be endured only through shared efforts and mutual support. But while the communal aspects of Viking life were crucial, the individual contributions of each person also played a vital role in survival. Viking society was structured in such a way that everyone had a specific role to play. From warriors to farmers to craftsmen and traders, each person contributed to the collective well-being. During the long winter months, when outdoor activities like farming or raiding were impossible, individuals focused on their indoor tasks, crafting tools, weaving clothing, or maintaining their homes. Even children were involved, helping with small chores or learning the skills that would one day help them contribute to the family's survival. This structure of individual and communal responsibility was key to their ability to adapt to the long winters. Even though the cold made life harder, it also provided a sense of purpose. With the looming darkness and bitter cold, there was no time to sit idle. There was always work to be done. This relentless drive to stay active, productive, and connected is what kept the Vikings going when others might have simply given in to despair. Their ability to adapt was not just about their tools, but about the way they viewed their world. They didn't see winter as something to endure passively. They saw it as something to conquer, something to live through with purpose. What's truly remarkable is how the Vikings' worldview shaped their survival strategies. Their belief that they could outwit the cold and the darkness gave them the mental strength to use every resource at their disposal. They didn't just work with what they had, they innovated, created, and adapted. The Vikings weren't merely surviving the winter, they were making it a part of their way of life, turning even the most difficult conditions into an opportunity for personal and communal growth. As we move forward, we'll begin to see how these adaptive strategies extended beyond the domestic sphere, influencing the way the Vikings approached travel, warfare, and even social organization. The ingenuity and resilience that helped them survive the coldest nights of winter were also the same qualities that made them one of the most successful cultures in history. But for now, think about what it took for them to make it through those endless nights. It wasn't just about the physical tools they used, it was about their ability to adapt, innovate, and come together as a community to conquer the cold. Now, let us shift gears a bit and explore another remarkable aspect of Viking survival, how they managed to not just endure the cold, but travel through it. Yes, even in the dead of winter, when the world was covered in snow and ice, the Vikings didn't let the cold stop them from traveling, raiding, and exploring. In fact, they were known for their incredible ability to travel long distances during the harshest seasons, using their resourcefulness to make their journeys possible. At first glance, traveling in the depths of winter might seem like an impossible task, and for many people it was. But the Vikings, with their finely tuned survival instincts, had a different approach. They understood the importance of movement, both for survival and for maintaining the vitality of their community. They needed to trade, raid, and explore in order to keep their society thriving. And so, the Vikings took to the winter roads, not on foot, but on sleds and ships built for cold, icy waters. The sled was a crucial tool for Viking travel during the winter. These sleds were designed to glide over snow and ice, making it easier for the Vikings to transport goods, firewood, and even animals across the frozen terrain. The sleds weren't just used for practical purposes, they were also essential for raiding and warfare. Viking warriors would often travel with sleds during their winter campaigns, hauling weapons, supplies, and even prisoners over the frozen ground. These sleds allowed the Vikings to move efficiently, even when roads were impassable due to heavy snow or ice. But the sled wasn't the only way the Vikings traveled during winter. They were also known for their incredible seafaring abilities, and they didn't let the cold weather stop them from venturing out onto the waters. The Viking longship was specially designed for winter travel, built with shallow drafts and strong, sturdy hulls that could handle icy waters. During the winter months, Vikings would sail across frozen rivers or cut through icy waters to reach distant lands. The ships were equipped with sails for strong winds, but they were also rowed when conditions were calmer, allowing the Vikings to navigate through both open seas and frozen waterways. The Vikings were incredibly adept at using their ships to their advantage, even in winter. They knew how to read the signs of the sea and the weather, adjusting their plans accordingly. For instance, while a ship might be able to travel across open water in the fall, it would need to be carefully maintained during the winter months to ensure it didn't succumb to the ravages of cold and ice. The Vikings took great care to maintain their ships, ensuring they were ready for action whenever needed. Historians still argue over how much the Vikings relied on these winter journeys, particularly in relation to their long-distance expeditions. Some believe that winter travel was mostly limited to short local trips, while others suggest that Vikings were capable of undertaking significant sea voyages even in the coldest months. What is clear, however, is that the Vikings didn't let winter stop them from reaching new places, whether for trade, exploration, or conquest. One of the most impressive feats of Viking winter travel was their ability to keep their ships and sleds in good working condition. Even in the freezing cold, the Vikings had to maintain and repair their vehicles to ensure they could continue to function through the winter. This included maintaining the wooden frames of their sleds and ships, making sure the runners were in good shape, and keeping the sails intact. The Vikings were also skilled at using animal hides and other materials to insulate their boats and sleds, protecting them from the elements and ensuring they didn't T-freeze or break under the strain of travel. Traveling in winter was not just about moving goods or raiding other tribes, it was also about survival. In such a cold climate, the Vikings had to be constantly on the move to avoid the stagnation of food and resources. They needed to find new trade routes, seek out new sources of supplies, and sometimes even flee from hostile forces. Traveling in the winter allowed them to keep their society functioning, ensuring that they had access to the resources they needed to survive the harsh months ahead. This ability to travel in winter was crucial for the Vikings' expansion across Europe and beyond. From their raids on the coasts of England to their explorations of North America, the Vikings' ability to navigate both land and sea in the dead of winter allowed them to reach far-flung territories and leave an indelible mark on history. They weren't just warriors, they were explorers, traders, and pioneers, making their way through a frozen world with the same ingenuity and determination that had helped them survive the coldest nights at home. As we move forward in our exploration of Viking winter survival, we see how their resourcefulness didn't just help them endure the cold, it helped them thrive in it, turning harsh winter conditions into opportunities for growth and expansion. But for now, think about how remarkable it is that, despite the cold and the darkness, the Vikings were able to travel the lands and seas, forging new paths and making their mark on the world. While it's clear that the Vikings had an incredible knack for adapting to the harsh conditions of winter, one of the most overlooked but perhaps most important factors in their survival was their mental strength. The psychological resilience of the Vikings was key to their ability to endure the long, cold nights and the months of isolation. While the physical tools they used to combat the cold, like clothing, fire, and food preservation, are well documented, was their mindset, their ability to embrace the harsh realities of winter and push through with relentless determination that made all the difference. Imagine being a Viking warrior, waking up in the early hours of a winter morning, knowing that the daylight will be brief and the cold will be unforgiving, but you don't have the luxury of staying inside, wrapped up in blankets, waiting for the warmth to return. No, you've got work to do. Whether it's chopping firewood, checking the traps you've set in the forest, or tending to your animals, you have to brave the cold. And it's not just a one-off job, it's a daily routine. Each task, each movement, is an act of defiance against the cold. But that's how the Vikings lived. They didn't wait for the winter to end. They adapted to it and made it a part of their daily rhythm. This wasn't easy. In fact, it was incredibly difficult. The Vikings faced physical challenges, yes, but it was their psychological resilience that truly set them apart. They had a unique mindset that allowed them to endure the darkness and cold with an unflinching resolve. Their mental toughness was a cornerstone of their survival. They believed in their ability to conquer whatever challenges came their way, no matter how harsh. This unyielding confidence allowed them to embrace the long, dark winters with a spirit of resilience, knowing that they would make it through. One example of this mental resilience can be found in the Viking warriors, or berserkers, who were said to channel the fierce energy of animals to fight. While it's likely that this berserk rage was a form of heightened adrenaline or psychological focus, it's a powerful symbol of the Viking mindset. These warriors were not just fighting with physical strength, they were fighting with an unshakable belief in their ability to triumph. Even during the coldest winters, when food was scarce and the darkness was oppressive, they pushed through with mental fortitude. This mental strength, whether on the battlefield or in their daily lives, helped the Vikings survive some of the most difficult conditions imaginable. Historians still argue about the psychological effects of the long Viking winters. Some believe that the Vikings' extreme reliance on mental toughness made them more prone to depression and isolation, while others argue that their strong communal bonds helped mitigate these challenges. One thing is certain, though: the Vikings were resilient in ways that went beyond the physical. They understood that in order to survive the cold, they had to be able to endure mentally as well. Their ability to turn the coldest nights into opportunities for growth, community, and survival is a testament to the mental toughness that defined their culture. The Vikings were also practical in the way they approached mental resilience. They understood the importance of keeping busy to stave off the psychological effects of the long, dark winters. When you're living in a longhouse, surrounded by family and friends, it's easy to see how their collective activities helped keep their spirits high. The shared chores, the storytelling, the songs, and the crafts all played a role in maintaining a sense of purpose during the long winter nights. These communal activities helped strengthen the Vikings' social bonds, making it easier to weather the physical and psychological toll of winter. One of the most crucial aspects of Viking winter survival was their ability to maintain a sense of hope, even when the darkness seemed endless. For many, the long winter months might have seemed like a time of endless struggle, but the Vikings saw winter as an opportunity to rest, regroup, and plan for the spring. They didn't just survive the cold, they used it to their advantage. They took the time to reflect, to strategize, and to make sure they were prepared for the challenges ahead. This sense of hope and preparation was deeply ingrained in Viking culture. They didn't just accept the cold, they anticipated it. They planned their food supplies, reinforced their shelters, and kept their bodies and minds active throughout the winter. They had faith that the spring would come, and that they would be ready for whatever it brought. Their resilience was built not just on their ability to survive the present, but on their belief in the future. As we continue to explore how the Vikings survived the cold, we'll see that it wasn't just about fighting the elements, it was about harnessing the elements, both physical and mental, and using them to create a life that was rich with purpose, community, and strength. Their ability to face the cold, both physically and psychologically, was a testament to their resilience, and it asks this resilience that allowed them to thrive in one of the harshest environments known to man. As we continue to delve into the Viking way of life during the coldest nights of winter, it's important to take a look at how they maintained a sense of community. The Vikings didn't simply survive as individuals. Their strength came from the tight-knit networks they created within their families and villages. The long, harsh winters could easily have driven people into isolation, but instead, the Vikings built systems of mutual support that helped them face the cold with a collective resolve. Picture yourself in a Viking longhouse during the dead of winter. The outside world is a frozen wasteland, and the howling winds whip through the roofs. Inside, the fire crackles and the warmth radiates throughout the space. But it's not just the fire that keeps you going, it's the presence of your fellow Vikings. In a community, there's always someone to share the burden, whether that's gathering firewood, preparing meals, or keeping the spirits high with conversation and storytelling. These shared experiences not only helped everyone stay warm physically, they also helped strengthen the bonds between individuals. Viking society was structured in a way that each member had a role to play, especially during the winter. The elder members of the community passed down knowledge and wisdom, ensuring that younger generations were equipped to handle the challenges of winter survival. This transfer of knowledge was vital, especially in the brutal winter months when every piece of information about food preservation, fire maintenance, or clothing construction could be a matter of life and death. The communal effort was not just about sharing physical resources. It was about the shared knowledge that kept their way of life alive. The Vikings' social structure also helped reinforce their sense of community. There was a clear division of roles: warriors, farmers, traders, craftsmen, and the like. But during the winter, these roles often blurred as the Vikings banded together to share tasks and support one another. Even the youngest Vikings would play their part, helping to gather firewood, mend clothing, or help care for the animals. The winters were a time of collaboration, where each member of the household played a part in making sure everyone survived until the thaw of spring. This emphasis on community wasn't just about practicality, was a deeply ingrained part of Viking culture. The Vikings believed in the strength of their community, seeing it as a microcosm of the larger world. The shared struggle to survive the winter created a sense of unity that extended beyond the walls of the longhouse. Their strength wasn't just found in their ability to endure the elements, it was found in the shared knowledge, labor, and support that made survival possible. Moreover, Viking winters were also a time for strengthening relationships within the family. The long hours of darkness meant that families were forced to spend more time together. This sense of closeness, though sometimes born out of necessity, was an important foundation for Viking society. The bond between parents and children, husbands and wives, and even extended family members was integral to their mental survival during the darkest months. The family unit wasn't just a source of warmth, it was a source of emotional support. While the cold winds howled outside, the warmth of the family hearth offered more than physical comfort. It offered a sense of security, knowing that you weren't alone in the battle against the elements. Historians still argue whether the Vikings' communal bonds were purely practical, or whether they were also deeply tied to their spiritual beliefs. Some scholars believe that Viking mythology, with its emphasis on fate, honor, and family, played a key role in fostering these strong social bonds. The gods themselves were often depicted as family members, working together to maintain balance in the world. Whether this influenced the Vikings' own relationships within their communities is still a subject of debate. But what is clear is that their sense of interconnectedness, both with each other and with the world around them, was crucial to their survival. The Viking winter was also a time for reflection and preparation for the future. While the cold made it difficult to travel or hunt, it provided the Vikings with the opportunity to prepare for the coming months. This preparation wasn't just about gathering resources, it was about ensuring the health and well-being of the entire community. The Vikings would often repair weapons and tools, mend clothing, and plan for future raids or voyages. It was a time of restlessness, yes, but also a time of anticipation. The Vikings knew that the harsh winter wouldn't last forever, and that the arrival of spring would bring with it new opportunities. The Viking community's emphasis on social bonds, shared responsibility, and future planning provided them with the psychological resilience they needed to face the long, cold nights. These winter months weren't just a time of survival. They were a time for strengthening the ties that held their society together. The mental fortitude they developed during these months would carry them through the worst of times, allowing them to face whatever challenges lay ahead, whether that be battling enemy forces, dealing with famine, or surviving the next harsh winter. As we continue exploring the Viking approach to survival, we'll see how these communal bonds and mental strategies translated into their ability to fight, travel, and conquer. The Vikings didn't just survive winter, they used it as an opportunity to thrive, building the foundation for the legendary Viking culture that would go on to shape the history of Northern Europe and beyond. As we continue to unpack the incredible ways the Vikings survived the harshest winters, one aspect stands out in both its practicality and ingenuity: the role of Viking warriors in winter survival. While we often associate Viking warriors with epic raids and fierce battles during the warmer months, their ability to adapt to the cold and carry out their raids during the winter months is equally remarkable. The cold, with all its challenges, did not deter the Viking warrior. It only seemed to embolden them further. Viking warriors, or Skaldmr and Dringer, were equipped with not only weapons, but a mindset that made them formidable in all seasons, including the dead of winter. It's important to understand that Viking warfare wasn't restricted to sunny days and warmer months. In fact, many of their raids occurred in the winter, when surprise and the element of harsh weather were on their side. The cold became an ally to the Viking warriors, allowing them to travel under the cover of snow and ice, making it harder for enemies to track them or anticipate their attacks. To achieve this, Vikings relied on a combination of expert travel strategies and the sheer fortitude of their warriors. The winter months provided them with a natural cloak. Snowstorms, icy rivers, and freezing temperatures worked in their favor, allowing them to approach enemy towns and settlements undetected. While many other armies would have slowed down or even stalled during the cold months, the Vikings adapted to these conditions. The frost didn't just hamper them, it turned their raids into an even more effective tool of conquest. But it wasn't just the winter conditions that allowed Viking warriors to remain a powerful force during these months. Sit was their preparation. Viking warriors were accustomed to traveling across frozen lands, and they made use of sleds and sturdy boots to traverse snow-laden terrains. Their clothing, which we've already discussed, was crafted to withstand the freezing temperatures, allowing them to march for hours without succumbing to the cold. Their cloaks, made from furs and wool, were designed for mobility, warmth, and durability. The Vikings were ready for the fight, whether in the warmth of summer or the biting chill of winter. Yet, Viking warfare wasn't only about traveling across frozen lands, it was also about the mental toughness needed to fight in the harshest conditions. The mental resilience that allowed the Vikings to endure cold, darkness, and isolation played a significant role in their ability to raid and conquer. They didn't fear the winter. Instead, They used it as an opportunity to strike when their enemies least expected it. Imagine the mindset of a Viking warrior who, despite the freezing winds and icy conditions, charges into battle with his axe raised high. That unwavering spirit, reinforced by the mental toughness learned during the brutal winters, made the Vikings one of the most formidable forces in history. But Viking warriors didn't just rely on their individual toughness, they relied on teamwork and community as well. The strength of the Viking army came from its close-knit structure. During winter campaigns, Vikings would often travel in groups or clans, relying on one another for support, both physically and emotionally. The strength of the Viking warrior was not just in his ability to endure the cold. It was in his ability to trust his comrades, share resources, and fight as part of a cohesive unit. This collective strength was essential for success in their winter raids, where the weather could quickly turn against them. Historians still argue about how much Viking warriors were affected by the cold during battle, especially when it came to long-term survival. Some suggest that constant exposure to the elements weakened their physical health, leading to injuries or illnesses that could have been avoided in warmer climates. Others, however, believe that the harsh conditions actually sharpened their skills, as survival in the cold required more attention to detail and more meticulous planning. Regardless of the debate, one thing is clear. The Vikings didn't shy away from the cold, they made it work for them. Viking warriors were also deeply resourceful when it came to weaponry. They understood that winter conditions could affect their gear, so they adapted their weapons to the cold. Viking axes, swords, and spears were designed for efficiency, but also for resilience in freezing temperatures. Wood, which could warp or crack in cold weather, was carefully chosen for its durability. Leather grips were designed to stay firm in the cold, and Viking shields were reinforced to withstand icy winds and blows. The adaptability of their weapons ensured that they could continue to fight even when conditions weren't ideal. In the end, the ability of Viking warriors to survive and thrive in winter came down to preparation, mental resilience, and a deep understanding of their environment. Whether raiding across frozen rivers, trekking through snow-covered mountains, or fighting on the shores of distant lands, Viking warriors turned the harsh conditions of winter into an asset, using the cold to their advantage in ways that other cultures could not. As we move forward, we'll begin to see how these warriors' experiences influenced Viking social structures, and how the challenges of winter shaped their culture and beliefs in ways that continue to inspire fascination today. Their relationship with the cold wasn't just about survival, it was about shaping the very foundation of what it meant to be Viking, resilient, resourceful, and always prepared to face whatever challenges came their way. As we continue to explore the Vikings' survival strategies during the coldest nights, it's crucial to examine another key element that helped them endure the long, harsh winters: their extraordinary adaptability in building and using tools. While most of us might think of tools simply as implements for getting the job done, the Vikings saw them as extensions of their own survival. These tools weren't just for working the land or crafting weapons. They were the very means by which Vikings overcame the challenges of winter, ensuring their continued existence in one of the most unforgiving environments known to humankind. Let's start with the simple yet essential tool, the axe. The Viking axe was a symbol of both practicality and power, capable of felling trees for firewood, clearing snow-covered paths, and even being wielded as a weapon in battle. The axe was crucial to Viking survival, and during the winter months, it became one of their most important tools. The cold, snow-heavy forests of Scandinavia required axes that were both strong and sharp enough to cut through frozen wood. Without them, the Vikings couldn't gather firewood or create the necessary structures for shelter. In addition to axes, the Vikings also developed sophisticated techniques for using their tools to craft more complex implements. For instance, Viking carpenters were skilled in creating longhouses and other buildings with insulated IOLs that could hold heat for longer periods. The Viking longhouse was built using timber, with the logs carefully arranged and sealed with moss or animal hides to provide additional insulation against the cold. These structures were not just homes, they were fortresses that stood strong against both the physical forces of winter and the test of time. The Vikings understood that the right tools, axes, hammers, chisels, and more, were integral to maintaining their way of life. Historians still debate the sophistication of Viking toolmaking. Some suggest that the Vikings' skills were rudimentary compared to other cultures, while others argue that their craftsmanship was advanced for the time. It's clear, however, that their tools were more than just functional. They were a testament to the Vikings' ingenuity. Their ability to create shelters, weapons, and tools that allowed them to survive in extreme conditions speaks to their resourcefulness and deep understanding of the environment they inhabited. While axes and carpentry tools were essential for maintaining their homes and survival, the Vikings also crafted tools for the other vital needs of winter. Fishing was, as we know, a major part of their food supply, and they used specialized fishing gear to keep the catch coming even during the cold months. Viking fishing spears were designed to break through thick ice, allowing them to reach fish hiding below the frozen surface. They also created fish traps and nets that could be easily set under ice, ensuring that they didn't have to wait for spring to catch their meals. The Vikings weren't just hunters, they were hunters of the land, sea, and even the frozen waters. But the Vikings' ability to adapt didn't stop at creating tools for practical use. It extended to their ability to craft weapons and armor that could withstand the cold. During winter raids or battles, Viking warriors had to rely on equipment that would work in freezing temperatures. Swords, shields, and spears were designed with the cold in mind. For example, the leather grips on their swords were treated with oils to prevent them from freezing, while shields were reinforced with layers of wood and leather to withstand the biting wind and snow. The Vikings understood that their weapons had to be as resilient as they were, able to endure the harsh conditions that would have broken lesser tools. This same resourcefulness extended to their clothing. The tools they used to make clothing, like spinning wheels for wool and tanning tools for hides, ensured that their garments were as effective as their physical tools in protecting them from the cold. Viking clothing wasn't just about fashion, it was about survival. The cold, wet winters demanded layers of warm, durable clothing, and the Vikings had the tools and techniques to craft exactly what they needed. The Vikings' adaptability in toolmaking wasn't limited to their homes, weapons, or clothing. Their entire society was built on the idea of using the resources at hand. Whether that meant modifying tools for different uses or finding creative ways to work with the materials around them. Even their trading networks were influenced by their ability to craft goods that were both useful and highly desirable to others. Viking tools, weapons, and even clothing became valuable commodities that could be traded with neighboring cultures. This network of trade was crucial for the Vikings, ensuring that they had access to resources that couldn't be found in their own lands. As we continue to examine the Vikings' survival strategies, we begin to understand that their mastery of tools wasn't just about craftsmanship, was about ensuring that every part of their lives was built to withstand the cold. Whether they were building homes, crafting weapons, or creating clothing, the Vikings used their knowledge and skill to adapt to one of the most unforgiving climates in the world. Their ability to make the most out of the tools at their disposal played a key role in ensuring that they didn't just survive the cold, they thrived in it. As we continue our exploration of Viking winter survival, one of the most fascinating elements to consider is their spiritual and cultural connection to the cold. The Vikings weren't just pragmatic in their approach to winter, they also integrated their environment into their beliefs, shaping their culture, religion, and even their attitudes toward the brutal seasons they faced. The cold wasn't just something to endure, it was something to understand, respect, and even embrace. Viking mythology is filled with references to winter and the cold, which speaks to how deeply this season influenced their worldview. One of the most prominent figures associated with the winter months was the god Aller, often referred to as the god of winter and the protector of travelers. Aller was depicted as a skilled hunter and archer, and he was also associated with skiing, which may have been inspired by the Vikings' practical use of skis in the snowy landscapes. The fact that a god dedicated to winter and cold was so central to Viking belief shows just how important winter was to their daily lives and their spiritual worldview. But it wasn't just Aller who was linked to the cold. The Vikings believed in numerous gods and spirits associated with the elements, and many of them were connected to the harshness of the winter months. For example, the god Skadi, the giantess of winter, was the personification of cold, snow, and hunting. She was a powerful figure in Viking mythology, often invoked in times of need during harsh winters. Skadi's association with winter and her ability to endure the cold gave the Vikings a sense of strength, teaching them that they could not only survive the harsh months. Viking spirituality wasn't just about worshiping gods. It was about a relationship with the natural world that included the seasons, the cold, and the land itself. The Vikings believed that the land was alive with spirits, and the winter months were a time when those spirits were most active. The dark, cold nights were thought to be inhabited by spirits of ancestors, gods, and nature's forces, all of which influenced the Vikings' lives. This connection to the spiritual world gave them a profound sense of purpose and a way to mentally cope with the challenges of winter. They didn't view winter as a harsh, empty time. It was a season full of meaning and activity, with gods and spirits walking alongside them. This spiritual connection to the winter months also extended to their rituals and traditions. The Vikings celebrated midwinter festivals, such as the Yule, to mark the passing of the longest night and the return of the light. Yule was a time to honor the gods, celebrate community, and give thanks for the warmth of the hearth. These midwinter festivals were not just celebrations, they were crucial for maintaining the mental well-being of Viking communities during the darkest days of the year. By engaging in rituals and festivals, the Vikings strengthened their bonds with one another and with the gods, reinforcing the sense that winter, though difficult, was a time of renewal and connection. The Vikings' respect for winter was also evident in the way they prepared for the season. Their homes were constructed to reflect their understanding of the land's cycles, ensuring that they could survive the bitter cold. But they also understood the need to keep spirits high. Winter could easily lead to isolation, depression, and mental fatigue, so the Vikings took active steps to avoid these psychological pitfalls. Their spiritual practices, storytelling, and communal activities around the hearth were all designed to combat the darkness, not just physically, but mentally. Historians still debate how much of Viking winter culture was rooted in practicality versus mythology. Some scholars argue that the spiritual and cultural connections to winter were primarily a way of explaining and coping with the physical hardships they faced. Others believe that these beliefs were integral to Viking identity, shaping the way they saw the world and, in turn, their survival strategies. What is clear is that the Vikings did not simply endure the winter. They engaged with it spiritually, making it a part of their larger worldview. This relationship between the Vikings and the cold extended into their broader cultural practices. For example, they saw the long, dark nights of winter as a time for reflection, learning, and preparing for the future. It was during these months that many of the sagas were told, passed down orally from one generation to the next. These stories, full of gods, heroes, and battles, were not just entertainment. Honor their ancestors and prepare for whatever the future might hold. In a way, the coldness of winter allowed the Vikings to reflect on life and death, heroism, and survival. The brutal conditions of winter didn't crush their spirits. They inspired them to tell stories of conquest and endurance, to honor their gods, and to celebrate their bonds with one another. Winter, then, wasn't just a challenge to survive, was an integral part of the Viking identity. A season to be respected, celebrated, and ultimately conquered. So, as we wrap up our exploration of how the Vikings survived the cold, it's essential to recognize that their ability to endure winter wasn't just about physical tools or strategies. It was also about their mental and spiritual approach to the season. The Vikings embraced winter as a part of their lives, woven into their cultural fabric. Through their resilience, their connection to their gods, and their sense of community, they turned the harshest months of the year into a time of strength and growth. As we continue to uncover the layers of Viking survival, it's clear that their ability to face the cold wasn't just a matter of physical strength. It was a combination of resilience, adaptation, and community spirit. But there's one more aspect of Viking life that we haven't fully explored yet, and that is the incredible role of the Viking family in surviving the winter months. The family unit was the bedrock of Viking society, and during the long, harsh winters, it became even more crucial to ensuring their survival. The Viking family wasn't just about individual roles. It was a tightly woven web of interdependence. Each member had a job to do, and those roles were amplified during the winter months. With the outside world locked in ice and snow, the family became the central hub for everything from cooking to preserving food, from tending to animals to maintaining the fire. But it was, just about survival. It was about making sure that every member of the family had what they needed to stay warm, healthy, and mentally strong. At the heart of the Viking family was the longhouse. These communal homes, designed to protect against the cold, were typically shared by multiple generations. Grandparents, parents, children, and sometimes extended family all lived together under the same roof, working together to ensure everyone's survival. This close-knit living arrangement wasn't just about sharing space, it was about sharing resources, labor, and emotional support. Children played an important role in Viking winter survival. While they may not have been involved in the more dangerous aspects of life, such as hunting or fighting, they still had essential tasks to help the family get through the long nights. The youngest members of the family would gather firewood, assist with cooking, and even take care of the animals during the cold months. They were also the next generation of Vikings, learning essential survival skills through practical experience and the stories they heard around the fire. The role of women in Viking families was particularly crucial in the winter months. In addition to the more traditional domestic duties, such as weaving, sewing, and cooking, women were often responsible for maintaining the family's food supply. Preserving food for the winter was a massive task that required skill and preparation. Women would spend hours salting, smoking, pickling, and drying food to ensure the family had enough to eat during the months when fresh food was scarce. They also managed the household's inventory of firewood, ensuring that the fire could burn day and night. It was these quiet, behind-the-scenes efforts that kept the family safe and well-fed through the toughest of times. The role of men in the Viking family was typically centered around hunting, defense, and protecting the community. While the winter months meant fewer opportunities for battle or raids, Viking men were still responsible for ensuring the family's physical safety and securing resources like firewood and food. They would venture out into the harsh winter landscape, hunting for game or trapping animals for meat. Their strength and endurance were put to the test in the freezing cold, but they were determined to provide for their families. The communal nature of Viking families also extended to the concept of thing, the Viking assembly, where legal matters, disputes, and decisions were made. During the long winter nights, the thing was a place for discussion and decision-making. These gatherings helped maintain order within the family and the community. While much of Viking life revolved around preparing for the winter or surviving it, the thing allowed people to address social matters, ensuring that everyone had a voice and that the collective needs of the community were met. Viking families also had a sense of connection with the land, and this relationship was integral to surviving the winter. They knew the rhythms of nature, the cycles of planting and harvesting, the movement of animals, and the patterns of the weather. This deep connection to the land gave them the knowledge they needed to survive, ensuring they had food, shelter, and resources. They also believed that their ancestors watched over them, their spirits helping guide them through the darkest, coldest months. In this way, the family's survival wasn't just about physical efforts, it was about spiritual strength as well. Historians still debate how much the structure of Viking families influenced their ability to survive. Some scholars suggest that the extended family living arrangements, where multiple generations worked together, created a more resilient society. Others argue that the Viking desire to maintain honor and reputation led them to push through hardships in ways that might have been less possible in other cultures. Either way, what's clear is that the family was at the center of Viking life, and their survival through the long winters was dependent on the strength and unity of the family unit. The bonds between family members were tested during the winter, but they were also strengthened. There was no room for selfishness or isolation. Survival depended on each person playing their part. The family provided warmth, not just physically, but emotionally. This sense of unity, this deep-rooted connection to each other, was a cornerstone of Viking life, and it was within the longhouse, surrounded by the people they loved, that the Vikings found the strength to push through the darkest, coldest nights. As we continue to explore how the Vikings thrived during the cold, we'll see how these family dynamics extended beyond the hearth. The lessons learned in the longhouse about cooperation, endurance, and shared responsibility laid the foundation for the Viking civilization's greater achievements. Their ability to survive the winter wasn't just a testament to their tools or strategies, it was a reflection of their values and the strength of their community. As we explore the final layers of Viking winter survival, it's impossible to ignore the ways in which the cold and darkness shaped the Vikings' cultural and spiritual outlook. Their relationship with the seasons wasn't just about enduring or surviving, it was about respecting the rhythms of nature, understanding the deep connection between the land, the weather, and their identity. The harsh winters were not something to fight against. They were woven into the Viking worldview, inspiring strength, creativity, and resilience. The long, cold nights of winter, while physically challenging, were a time of deep reflection for the Vikings. The darkness was seen not only as a physical absence of light, but also as a spiritual time, a time when the boundaries between the human world and the divine were thinner. Vikings believed that during winter, especially around the solstice, the veil between the living and the dead grew thin, allowing for a closer connection with the spirits of their ancestors. This belief was reflected in the rituals, ceremonies, and feasts they held to honor their ancestors and the gods who watched over them. It was a time for the community to come together, reaffirming their bonds with one another, the land, and their heritage. One of the most significant cultural events of the Viking winter was the Yule festival. While Yule traditions are now commonly associated with Christmas, many of the customs that we recognize today, like the Yule log, the giving of gifts, and the concept of a midwinter feast, have their roots in Viking practices. For the Vikings, Yule was a time to celebrate the return of the sun, to mark the turning of the seasons, and to prepare for the growing light. During this time, families would gather around the hearth, feast, tell stories, and make offerings to the gods. The Yule festival reinforced the cycle of the year, providing hope that the darkness would eventually give way to light. This spiritual connection to the cold also extended to Viking rituals, which were deeply tied to their relationship with nature. The harsh winter conditions were believed to be the domain of various gods and spirits, and it was customary for the Vikings to offer sacrifices or perform rituals to appease these entities. For example, they would honor the god Freyr, the god of fertility and harvest, in hopes of ensuring the return of warmer days and bountiful crops. They also invoked the gods Aller and Skadi, as we've discussed during the winter months, praying for protection from the cold and for safe travels through the snow and ice. These rituals weren't merely about appeasing gods. They were about maintaining balance between the human and divine worlds, ensuring that nature's cycles would continue in harmony. Historians still debate the exact nature of Viking religious practices during winter. Some believe that the Vikings practiced a form of animism, worshipping natural forces such as the wind, the snow, and the cold itself, while others argue that their religious ceremonies were primarily focused on honoring the gods and ancestors. Either way, it's clear that the Vikings didn't just see winter as a season to endure. They saw it as a time to actively engage with the world around them, both physically and spiritually. Winter also provided the Vikings with the opportunity to reflect on their past, honor their ancestors, and prepare for the coming year. The long nights gave them the space to gather around the fire and share stories, epic tales of gods, heroes, and battles. These stories, passed down through generations, were more than just entertainment. They were a means of preserving history and reinforcing values like bravery, loyalty, and honor. The sagas told around the Viking hearth weren't just about nostalgia for the past. They were about understanding the present and preparing for the future. The Vikings saw themselves as part of an ongoing story, a legacy that was shaped by their ancestors and would be carried forward by their descendants. This sense of continuity, of being part of something greater than themselves, was central to the Viking mindset. The cold and darkness of winter didn't isolate them, it connected them to their heritage, to the gods, and to the future. It was during the winter months that the Vikings, huddled around their hearths, took the time to reflect on their place in the world. The darkness gave them the space to honor the past, while the returning light of the sun represented the promise of renewal and new opportunities. As we look at the broader context of Viking life, it becomes evident that their relationship with winter was far more than just practical. The cold was intertwined with their spirituality, their culture, and their sense of identity. Winter wasn't something to fight against. That was a challenge to be met with ingenuity, resilience, and an unwavering connection to the natural world. The Vikings didn't merely survive the cold. They used it as a way to strengthen their bonds with one another, with their ancestors, and with the land itself. Looking back on how the Vikings navigated the most challenging season of all, it's clear that their success in the winter months was solely dependent on their physical tools or survival strategies. It was rooted in their deep spiritual connection to the cold and dark, their ability to adapt their minds and bodies to the challenges of the season, and their unwavering belief that no matter how harsh the winter, they could face it as a united community. This mindset, forged through generations of survival, is what made the Vikings one of the most enduring cultures in history. As we wrap up our exploration of Viking survival during the coldest nights of the year, it's essential to look at the lasting legacy of their resilience. The Vikings were not just survivors of the cold, they were pioneers, shaping a culture and society that would leave an indelible mark on history. Their ability to thrive in one of the harshest environments on Earth speaks to their ingenuity, adaptability, and communal spirit. But their story doesn't end with winter. It carries forward in the cultural, historical, and societal footprints they left behind. The Viking legacy is one of exploration, of pushing boundaries, both geographically and mentally. The coldest winters in Scandinavia didn't just teach the Vikings how to survive. They taught them how to expand beyond their homelands. The same mindset that helped them endure the brutal conditions of the North inspired their legendary voyages to new lands. From the coasts of North America to the rivers of Russia, the Vikings ventured far beyond their own shores. They built ships capable of navigating not just open seas, but frozen rivers and ice-covered landscapes, making them some of the greatest explorers in history. Their shipbuilding techniques were a direct response to the cold. Longships, with their shallow drafts and durable construction, allowed Vikings to sail through icy waters and travel across the northern seas with unprecedented speed and agility. These ships weren't just tools for raiding, they were vehicles of discovery, enabling the Vikings to make some of the first transatlantic voyages. Even in the harshest winter conditions, they sailed through frigid waters, proving that they were masters of not only survival, but expansion. But the Viking legacy isn't confined to exploration alone. Their lasting influence can be seen in their social structures, which emphasized the importance of community and family. Viking society was built on cooperation. Every member had a role to play, and the well-being of the group came before individual desires. This spirit of collaboration helped them weather the cold and come out stronger, and it can be seen in their intricate legal systems, their art, and their enduring sense of honor. These values, passed down through generations, would shape the cultures that followed, from the Normans to the early medieval European kingdoms. The Vikings' adaptability to the cold wasn't just practical, it was symbolic of their larger approach to life. They didn't shy away from challenges, they embraced them. They understood that every difficulty, whether it was a harsh winter, a lack of resources, or a fierce enemy, could be overcome with creativity, perseverance, and unity. In many ways, the Vikings were early examples of resilience in the face of adversity, a trait that is still celebrated today. As we look at the remnants of Viking society, whether in their legendary sagas, their art, or the physical ruins of their settlements, we can see that their ability to thrive in the cold had a ripple effect that would shape future generations. The harsh winters of Scandinavia weren't just obstacles to be overcome. They were opportunities to innovate, to learn, and to adapt. The Viking spirit, forged in the coldest of conditions, would go on to inspire the world long after their time. Historians continue to debate the true extent of Viking influence and legacy. Some argue that their impact was more cultural than political, while others suggest that their role in shaping Europe's early history was far greater than we realize. What is clear, however, is that the Vikings didn't just survive the cold, they thrived in it, turning the harshest conditions into a testing ground for innovation, unity, and exploration. Their ability to conquer winter is a testament to the strength of their culture and the enduring resilience of the Viking people. In the end, the legacy of Viking survival is more than just a story of battling the coldest, a story of community, resourcefulness, and the unbreakable will to overcome adversity. The harsh winters of the North were not just a challenge, they were a proving ground for the Viking way of life. And while the Vikings may have lived over 1,000 years ago, their ability to survive and thrive in the face of such extreme conditions continues to resonate in the modern world. The lessons they imparted about resilience, innovation, and community are just as relevant today as they were during those long, cold nights. As we reach the final chapters of our journey into Viking winter survival, let us pause for a moment and reflect on one of the most enduring aspects of Viking life: their remarkable ability to adapt, not only to the physical challenges of the cold, but to the ever-changing dynamics of their world. The Vikings' connection to the seasons, their community spirit, and their ingenuity didn't just help them survive the winter. They allowed them to carve out a legacy that stretched across centuries and continents. The Viking worldview was not just about surviving the winter. It was about embracing the cycles of nature, understanding the rhythms of the earth, and integrating those rhythms into their daily lives. To the Vikings, the seasons were not obstacles to be overcome. They were part of a larger, interconnected cycle. Winter was merely one phase in the ongoing dance between darkness and light, cold and warmth, death and renewal. It was this cyclical perspective that allowed them to remain steadfast in the face of adversity. They understood that the bitter cold of winter would eventually give way to the warmth of spring, just as night would always give way to day. This cyclical view of the world allowed them to endure because they never saw winter as an end. Was simply a season to be survived and respected. The Vikings also recognized that their survival was intimately tied to their relationship with the land and the natural world. Unlike some cultures that sought to dominate nature, the Vikings worked in harmony with it, using the resources at hand, but never overexploiting them. They built homes that worked with the environment, designed ships that could withstand the harshest seas, and made clothing from materials that were perfectly suited to the conditions around them. Their tools, clothing, and homes were all reflections of their deep understanding of the natural world, and their ability to work with it, not against it, allowed them to survive even the most extreme conditions. But their success in the cold was just about the physical and environmental factors. It was also about the strength of their social fabric. The Vikings understood that the key to surviving the winter was just having the right tools or the best clothing. It was about having a community that worked together. The longhouse, the center of Viking family life, was not just a shelter from the cold. It was a symbol of unity. Within its walls, the Vikings found warmth not just from the fire, but from each other. Whether it was sharing food, lending a hand with chores, or telling stories around the fire, the strength of the Viking community was their greatest asset. In many ways, the Vikings' approach to winter was a reflection of their broader approach to life. They weren't simply trying to survive, they were trying to thrive. They didn't accept hardship as something to be endured passively. They faced it head-on with creativity, adaptability, and an unyielding sense of community. They turned every challenge into an opportunity, using their ingenuity to find solutions and their collective spirit to pull through. This mindset also shaped the way the Vikings approached their most formidable challenges: war, raids, and conquest. Just as they adapted to the cold with their tools, their clothing, and their community structure, they adapted their tactics and strategies to the challenges of the battlefield. They weren't just warriors, they were masters of strategy, using the environment to their advantage. Whether it was raiding in the dead of winter or outsmarting their enemies in the heat of battle, this adaptability, this ability to make the most out of any situation, was at the core of Viking success. But perhaps the most lasting legacy of Viking winter survival is the way it shaped their culture. The harsh winters of Scandinavia didn't just forge resilient warriors, they forged a resilient society, a society that understood the importance of community, the value of adaptability, and the strength that comes from enduring hardship together. These values, passed down through generations, shaped the Viking world in ways that would resonate for centuries to come. The stories of Viking endurance in the face of winter, of their ability to conquer the cold, have inspired countless generations, not just in Scandinavia, but around the world. Today, when we think of the Vikings, we often think of their raiding, their ships, and their warriors. But at the heart of Viking culture, at the heart of their survival, was the ability to adapt. The coldest winters were not something to fear. They were a challenge to be faced with innovation, resilience, and unity. The lessons the Vikings taught us about overcoming adversity in the harshest of conditions are just as relevant today as they were 1,000 years ago. And as we close this chapter on Viking survival through the coldest nights, remember, the Vikings didn't just endure, they thrived. They transformed winter from an obstacle into an opportunity. They didn't just survive the cold, they mastered it. Their legacy isn't just a story of endurance, it's a story of strength, innovation, and the unbreakable spirit of a people who faced the harshest winters and came out stronger for it. The Vikings' extraordinary resilience during the coldest nights wasn't limited to the tools they made, the food they preserved, or even their mental toughness. It was also deeply embedded in their social systems and how they communicated with one another. Community was at the heart of Viking survival, and it was especially vital in the long winter months when isolation could easily set in. The ability to collaborate, share resources, and work together was one of the fundamental aspects of Viking society, and it played a crucial role in their ability to face the most challenging aspects of winter. Unlike many other cultures that relied heavily on individual success, the Vikings thrived because they saw strength in unity. This wasn't just a concept for the Viking warrior on the battlefield, but for every member of the community. The communal mindset wasn't just about resource sharing, it was about emotional support, cooperation, and a deep sense of loyalty to one another. The harshness of winter only reinforced this need for cooperation, and Vikings knew that survival wasn't just about having enough food or warmth for one person. It was about ensuring that everyone in the family or village was cared for. This sense of unity began in the longhouse, the center of Viking family and community life. Inside these sturdy, well-insulated homes, family members didn't just live side by side, they worked side by side. It was during the winter months that the longhouse became the most vital space in Viking life. Their warmth was generated not just from the fire, but from the conversations, the shared work, and the collective effort to survive. Parents taught their children vital survival skills like hunting, gathering, and preserving food, passing down knowledge that would ensure the continuity of the community. The longhouse also served as the center for communal rituals and gatherings. During the long nights of winter, storytelling was an essential practice. Vikings would gather around the hearth to share tales of gods, heroes, and ancestors, keeping alive the stories that defined their identity. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were the foundation of Viking culture, reinforcing their values of courage, loyalty, and resilience. The telling of these tales gave purpose to the dark hours, bringing people together and strengthening their sense of belonging. For the Vikings, stories were not just a form of entertainment, they were a tool for survival, helping maintain a collective identity even in the most isolating of seasons. And it wasn't just in the longhouses where Viking community life flourished. Even in smaller villages, cooperation was key. Vikings would often form tight-knit groups or clans, each responsible for specific tasks that contributed to the well-being of the whole. Some groups would focus on hunting, while others would take on the task of gathering firewood or tending to livestock. But all of these efforts were linked to one central goal: survival. No one person was more important than the other, and each had a critical role to play. Even as the cold winds howled outside, these communities knew that survival depended on their collective strength. The Vikings also had a deep understanding of the importance of mutual aid, and during the hardest winters, it was common for neighbors to help each other. A community that shared resources, supported each other through hard times, and lent a hand when needed, was a community that could endure anything. The strong bonds between Viking families were built on a foundation of trust, respect, and shared experience. When times were tough, it wasn't just about surviving individually. It was about ensuring that everyone in the community had the strength to get through. Viking society was also organized in such a way that leadership was rooted in responsibility, not power. Chieftains and leaders were respected not for their authority, but for their ability to guide and provide for their people, especially during difficult seasons like winter. Leadership in the Viking world wasn't about dictating terms. It was about leading by example, taking care of the needs of the community, and ensuring that everyone had what they needed to survive. This sense of leadership was rooted in respect for the community, and it gave the Vikings the social cohesion necessary to face the long, cold nights with confidence. One of the most fascinating aspects of Viking survival in winter was how they used their social systems to tackle the challenges of the season. The shared labor, the collective rituals, and the deep sense of responsibility toward each other all contributed to a way of life that allowed them to not just survive, but to thrive in one of the coldest, most challenging environments on Earth. This collective spirit didn't just keep the Vikings alive, it allowed their culture to endure for centuries, leaving an indelible mark on history. The lessons of Viking survival, of communal effort, shared responsibility, and mutual aid are just as relevant today as they were 1,000 years ago. In a world that often emphasizes individual achievement, the Vikings remind us that survival and success are often built on the strength of the community. The winter months may have been cold and dark, but the Vikings knew that together they could face anything. Their legacy isn't just one of endurance, it's one of unity, collaboration, and the unbreakable bonds that hold us together through the toughest times. As we continue to unravel the Viking approach to surviving the coldest nights, we come to another fascinating aspect of their winter survival: the way they adapted their tools and weapons for the unique challenges of the season. It's one thing to have sharp swords and sturdy axes in the summer, when the ground is soft and the weather is cooperative. But what about when the world is frozen and the temperatures dip well below freezing? How did the Vikings ensure that their weapons and tools didn't fail them in such extreme conditions? The Vikings were not only skilled at adapting to the natural environment, they were masters at adjusting their gear and weapons to meet the demands of winter. One of the most important tools for any Viking warrior was his sword or axe, but these weapons had to be adjusted for the cold. If they were to function properly, metal, in particular, can become brittle in freezing temperatures. So the Vikings had to ensure that their weapons were crafted to withstand the cold without snapping or warping. Viking blacksmiths, known for their exceptional skills, made sure that swords and axes were carefully forged from high-quality steel, tempered in a way that allowed them to resist the frigid conditions without compromising their durability. The Vikings also took great care with their shields and armor. Viking shields were usually made of wood, and wood can crack and splinter when exposed to the cold. To prevent this, Vikings treated their shields with oils and tars to keep them flexible and strong during the winter months. The shields were also reinforced with layers of leather or iron, making them more durable against the freezing temperatures. Viking armor, while lighter than the heavy plate armor of other cultures, was designed to provide maximum protection against both the cold and the threat of enemy weapons. The Vikings used layers of chainmail and leather, which offered both flexibility and defense. These materials helped keep them warm while also providing protection during raids and battles. But the Vikings didn't just rely on traditional weapons and armor for winter survival. They also created new tools and techniques specifically for dealing with the unique challenges of the season. One of these innovations was the Viking sled. The sled made from wood and animal bones, was a critical tool for moving supplies and goods across the snow-covered landscape. Unlike modern vehicles, which can get stuck in deep snow, the sled's design allowed it to glide effortlessly over frozen terrain, making it an essential part of Viking winter travel and survival. The Vikings used sleds not only for transportation, but also for hunting, carrying large animals like deer or reindeer back to their villages after a successful hunt. In addition to sleds, the Vikings also relied on skis to navigate the snow. The design of Viking skis was simple but effectively narrow planks that allowed them to glide over snow with ease. Skiing wasn't just a sport or leisure activity for the Vikings. It was a critical tool for survival. Whether they were hunting, scouting, or traveling from village to village, skis provided them with an efficient way to move through the frozen landscape. Skiing became so ingrained in Viking culture that it was even associated with their gods, particularly Ular, the god of winter and skiing. Historians still debate the extent to which skis were used across Viking society. Some suggest that skiing was more common in certain areas, particularly in regions with heavy snowfall, while others argue that it was a widespread activity throughout Viking lands. Regardless of how widely skis were used, it's clear that the Vikings recognized the value of adapting their tools to meet the challenges of the cold. The Vikings also used the winter months to craft new tools and refine their existing gear. The colder, darker days provided more time for craftsmanship, and many Vikings took advantage of this time to sharpen their weapons, repair their clothing, or create new items that would help them survive the next season. This focus on craftsmanship wasn't just about creating weapons and tools. It was about creating items that would enhance their chances of survival. The Viking craftsmen knew that their ability to adapt to the harsh environment depended on their skill with these tools, and they passed this knowledge down through generations. In addition to the physical tools they made, the Vikings also understood the importance of mental preparation for surviving the winter. The cold could wear down even the strongest person, both physically and emotionally. The Vikings knew that to survive the winter, they needed to stay sharp mentally as well. This is where the role of storytelling and sagas came in. During the long, dark nights, the Vikings would gather around the fire and share stories of their ancestors, gods, and heroes. These stories were more than just entertainment. They were a way to maintain morale, reinforce cultural values, and inspire the next generation to endure the challenges of winter. The Vikings' ability to adapt their tools and weapons for winter survival was not just a matter of practicality. It was a testament to their resilience and creativity. They didn't just accept the cold as a challenge. They met it head-on, using their ingenuity and skill to turn the winter months into an opportunity for growth and development. Their tools and techniques were a direct response to the harsh environment they lived in, and these innovations allowed them to thrive where others might have perished. As we look at the legacy of the Vikings, we see that their ability to adapt to the cold and to innovate in the face of adversity was one of the key factors that made them such a powerful force in history. Whether it was through their weapons, their skis, or their craftsmanship, the Vikings turned the coldest months into a time of progress and survival. As we progress through our journey of Viking survival, we can ignore one of the most crucial components that helped them thrive through the coldest winters: their diet. The cold, harsh winters of Scandinavia weren't just an obstacle. They were a challenge that required not only strength, but also wisdom in how the Vikings sourced and preserved their food. When fresh produce wasn't available, and when the landscape was buried under thick layers of snow and ice, the Vikings needed to ensure they had enough food to last the long, dark months. The key to Viking winter survival was their ingenuity in food preservation. They didn't have the luxury of refrigerators or modern canning techniques, so they relied on the natural methods of salting, smoking, drying, and fermenting to store food for the months ahead. Fish, particularly cod and herring, were staples of the Viking diet. The cold waters of Scandinavia teemed with fish, and the Vikings would catch them during the warmer months and preserve them to eat throughout the winter. Salted fish, when stored properly, could last for months, ensuring a steady food supply even when the seas were too rough or frozen for fishing. In addition to fish, the Vikings preserved meats by smoking or drying them. Hunting was a major activity during the winter, and the Vikings would hunt wild animals like reindeer, deer, and wild boar. These animals were a valuable source of protein, and the Vikings knew how to preserve every part of the animal, from the meat to the hides. Dried meat, especially venison, became a vital food source during the winter months when fresh food was scarce. The Vikings also kept livestock, pigs, cows, and sheep that provided them with meat, milk, and wool. Pigs, in particular, were slaughtered in late fall, and their meat was salted and smoked to last through the winter. But it wasn't just animal products that sustained the Vikings. The winter months also required them to rely on root vegetables and grains. Root vegetables like carrots, turnips, and parsnips could be harvested before the first frost and stored in cool, dry conditions throughout the winter. Grains, especially barley and oats, were dried and stored in large sacks, providing the Vikings with ingredients for bread, porridge, and ale. These grains were not only important for the Vikings' diet, they also played a crucial role in brewing their famous ale, which was a staple drink during the winter months. Fermentation was another key preservation technique that helped the Vikings make the most of what they had. Fermented foods, such as sauerkraut, pickled vegetables, and fermented dairy, were commonly consumed during the winter months. These foods not only helped preserve vegetables, but also aided in digestion, which was essential when consuming large amounts of preserved meats and fish. Vikings would also ferment milk to make cheese and yogurt-like products, which provided necessary fats and proteins during the colder months when fresh dairy was unavailable. The preservation of food wasn't just about practicality. It was also a form of cultural wisdom passed down from generation to generation. The Vikings understood that the success of their winter survival depended on careful planning and resource management. Their ability to store food, plan for lean months, and creatively preserve what they had ensured that they could withstand the challenges of winter. Whether it was drying fish, salting meat, or fermenting vegetables, the Vikings turned the harsh winter into an opportunity to be resourceful, inventive, and prepared. It's also important to note that the Vikings didn't just rely on their stored food to survive. They also had an understanding of the natural environment that allowed them to forage for food during the winter months. While the frozen landscape didn't offer much in terms of fresh produce, the Vikings were skilled at identifying edible plants and berries that could be found even in the coldest conditions. They would forage for wild herbs, mushrooms, and even the occasional berry, using these to supplement their preserved diet and add variety to their meals. One of the more surprising elements of Viking winter survival was their ability to hunt and fish even when the weather was at its worst. The Vikings weren't deterred by snowstorms, freezing temperatures, or frozen rivers. They knew how to make the most of these conditions. They would use specialized tools to break through the ice, allowing them to catch fish even in the dead of winter. They also used sleds and skis to transport their catches back to the village, ensuring that they could continue to rely on the bounty of the land and sea, even in the coldest months. Historians still debate the exact makeup of the Viking diet during the winter months. Some suggest that they were more reliant on preserved foods than we realize, while others believe that fresh meat and fish played a more significant role. What's clear, however, is that the Vikings understood the importance of food preservation and innovation. As important to recognize that their ability to thrive in the cold was indeed just about physical strength or mental resilience. It was about their deep knowledge of their environment and their resourcefulness in using everything at their disposal. As we continue our deep dive into the Viking approach to surviving the coldest nights of the year, we come to one of the most remarkable aspects of Viking life: their ability to create and maintain lasting social structures that were as resilient as their homes and tools. They understood the importance of a well-organized society that could weather both the physical and emotional challenges of the season. The bonds within the Viking community were crucial in helping them push through the harsh winters, and it was this strength in unity that allowed them to thrive. Each person had a role to play in ensuring that the long nights of winter didn't tear their community apart. These longhouses weren't just homes, they were the very heart of Viking social life. Inside these communal spaces, families and even larger communities came together, both physically and emotionally. The cold winter months meant that there was no escaping the presence of one another. But instead of this being an isolating factor, it became a strengthening force. The long hours spent together inside the longhouse allowed Viking families to bond, share their experiences, and support each other through the toughest of times. But the Vikings found ways to combat this. They knew the importance of morale, and the winter months were filled with activities designed to keep spirits high. Storytelling was one of the most common pastimes. Tales of gods, heroes, and ancestors were told around the fire, reinforcing cultural values and keeping the community connected. These stories weren't just about passing the time, they were about teaching lessons of resilience, courage, and endurance, qualities that were essential to surviving the cold. The Vikings also knew the importance of celebrating together. Midwinter festivals, like Yule, were a time to come together as a community, share food, and offer sacrifices to the gods in hopes of ensuring good fortune for the coming year. These festivals were marked by feasts, drinking, and dancing, all of which helped strengthen the bonds between the members of the community. In a way, these festivals served as a kind of emotional insulation, helping to keep the cold from creeping into their hearts as much as it did their homes. The role of leadership within Viking society was equally important in maintaining social stability during the winter months. Viking chieftains and leaders were responsible for guiding their people through difficult times, ensuring that everyone was working together and sharing resources. But leadership in Viking society wasn't just about power, it was about responsibility. Leaders were expected to protect their people, provide for them, and ensure that the community was functioning smoothly. Their ability to maintain order and keep the community united was a crucial factor in the Vikings' ability to survive the cold. One of the key elements of Viking leadership was the concept of thing, the Viking assembly. It was during these winter gatherings that important decisions were made about the future of the community, ensuring that everyone's voice was heard and that the needs of the group were met. Historians still argue over how much influence the thing had in Viking society, especially during the winter months. Some scholars believe that these gatherings were crucial for maintaining social order, while others argue that they played a more symbolic role in reinforcing the unity of the community. Regardless of the exact nature of the thing, it's clear that it was an essential part of Viking society, particularly during the winter months, when the cold made isolation a real threat. At the heart of Viking survival was their ability to work together, share resources, and support one another. They didn't just survive the cold, they thrived because they understood that their strength came from the collective effort of their community. Whether it was through leadership, shared work, or cultural rituals, the Vikings built a social system that allowed them to endure the darkest, coldest months with a sense of unity and purpose. As we look at Viking survival strategies, it becomes clear that their ability to adapt to the harsh winters wasn't just about their tools, weapons, or food preservation techniques. It was about the strength of their social fabric. The bonds within the Viking community, forged in the fires of winter, allowed them to endure and flourish in one of the most challenging environments in history. Their legacy of unity, collaboration, and collective survival is just as important as their physical innovations. And it's this sense of community that allowed the Vikings to thrive for centuries. As we continue to piece together the Viking story, it's impossible to ignore how their survival during the coldest. For the Vikings, winter wasn't just a season to be endured, it was a defining part of who they were. The challenges they faced during the dark months, from the brutal cold to the isolation and scarcity of resources, served to sharpen their resolve, strengthen their culture, and solidify their place in history. One of the most significant aspects of Viking life during winter was their ability to adapt to extreme isolation during the long nights. The Vikings couldn't rely on the bustling markets or lively trade routes that existed during the warmer months. In many areas, especially those far from other settlements, Vikings were essentially cut off from the outside world. While this isolation could easily have led to despair, the Vikings found ways to turn it into an advantage. They relied on their close-knit communities to survive, and these communities were self-sufficient in ways that would seem unimaginable today. Winter wasn't just a time of physical struggle, it was a time of mental endurance. With the constant threat of famine, the harsh cold, and the long nights, the Vikings had to cultivate a mindset of resilience. Freezing temperatures, and sometimes even enemies from neighboring clans. Yet, rather than being defeated by these challenges, the Vikings embraced them. The cold became a part of their identity, and winter, rather than a time of weakness, was viewed as a time to demonstrate strength and endurance. This mindset of resilience wasn't only limited to individual survival, it was a collective approach. They saw the hardships they faced as trials sent by the gods. Rather than seeking to escape the difficulties of winter, they embraced them as part of their fate in their belief system. Overcoming adversity was not just a personal victory, it was a victory that connected them to the divine. Their resilience in the cold was as much a spiritual practice as it was a practical necessity. The winter months also provided the Vikings with the time and space to reflect on their past and prepare for the future. When the ground was frozen and farming was not an option, the Vikings turned inward. They worked on their crafts, repaired their homes, maintained their tools, and planned for the spring. This period of reflection allowed the Vikings to reinforce their cultural values, share stories of their ancestors, and renew their sense of purpose. The winter was a time to honor the past, connect with the gods, and look ahead to the challenges that would come with the return of spring. This connection between the Vikings and their past was reinforced through storytelling. These stories weren't just for entertainment, they were essential to the Viking way of life. The tales of mighty warriors, valiant kings, and divine beings served as both a reminder of their heritage and a source of inspiration. Loyalty and resilience, teaching younger generations how to face the cold, both literally and figuratively. These stories were the fabric of Viking culture, and they gave strength to the people during the darkest months. The ability to adapt to isolation, to use the winter months for reflection and growth, and to draw strength from their heritage was essential to the Viking spirit. They didn't view the winter as something to endure, it was a season of introspection, renewal, and connection. Through their community bonds, their spiritual beliefs, and their connection to the land, the Vikings thrived in one of the harshest climates on Earth. Their legacy of resilience, innovation, and unity in the face of adversity remains an enduring example of how hardship can be turned into strength. It was the cold months that brought people together, huddled around the hearth, sharing not just warmth, but also knowledge, stories, and resources. Without the isolation of winter, the tight-knit communities that defined Viking society might not have existed. By the time spring arrived, the Vikings were more than ready to face the challenges of the warmer months. The winter months had tested their physical strength, mental fortitude, and social cohesion, and in the process, they had emerged stronger. It gave them the strength to endure, the resilience to overcome, and the community to thrive. In looking at how the Vikings survived the coldest nights, it's clear that their ability to persevere was on just about the practical aspects of survival. It was about how they viewed their environment, their society, and their place in the world. The Vikings understood that winter was more than just a season. It was a test of character, a time to demonstrate strength, unity, and resourcefulness. They didn't just survive the cold, they mastered it, and in doing so, they created a culture that would endure for centuries. As we near the final chapters of the Viking survival story, it's crucial to reflect on one of the most fascinating elements of Viking life: their relationship with their environment. The Vikings lived in a harsh and unforgiving climate, but rather than merely tolerating it, they turned it into an integral part of their daily existence. The winter months were not just something they had to endure, they were an opportunity for the Vikings to further their connection to the land, the sea, and even the gods. The cold wasn't just something to fear. It, from the cycles of the seasons to the movement of animals and weather patterns, helped them thrive in an environment that might have overwhelmed less resourceful cultures. They knew when to hunt, when to fish, and when to rest. The cold, harsh winters were simply another part of the natural cycle, one that the Vikings understood better than most. Viking survival during the winter was also influenced by their resourcefulness. While the cold restricted many activities, the Vikings found ways to turn it into an asset. They made use of every resource the land provided. The snow, which could make travel difficult for others, was turned into an advantage for the Vikings. Hunting became more efficient during winter, as animals huddled together for warmth, making them easier to find. But beyond the physical adaptations, the the Vikings' spiritual beliefs played a significant role in shaping their relationship with winter. As we've seen throughout this journey, the Vikings didn't simply fight against the cold, they embraced it. They saw winter as a season of introspection, a time when they could honor their ancestors and reconnect with their spiritual roots. The cold, dark months were a time to prepare for the coming year, to give thanks to the gods, and to ensure the survival of their families and communities. The Viking belief system was deeply tied to nature, and the gods were often associated with natural forces. Ul, the god of winter and skiing, was revered for his ability to navigate the snow and cold. Skadi, the giantess of winter, represented both the harshness and beauty of the cold months. The Vikings honored these deities through rituals, sacrifices, and offerings, ensuring that the gods would watch over them during the harshest times of the year. It's fascinating to consider how the Vikings viewed winter as not only a physical test, but also a spiritual journey. The cold was a challenge they accepted as part of their fate. The rituals and ceremonies performed during winter were ways to prepare for the future, to renew their strength, and to reaffirm their bond with the land and the divine. In many ways, winter was the ultimate test of Viking resilience, not just physically, but spiritually as well. Historians still debate the extent to which Viking spirituality influenced their survival strategies. Some argue that their spiritual connection to the land and the cold gave them the mental fortitude to face the harshest winters. Others believe that their survival strategies were purely pragmatic, shaped by their need to adapt to their environment. Regardless of which view you take, it's clear that the Vikings' relationship with the cold was complex. It was a combination of survival, adaptation, spiritual reverence, and respect for the cycles of nature. The Viking ability to adapt to the cold was not just about surviving it, was about thriving. They turned the winter months into a season of preparation, reflection, and growth. The challenges they faced in the cold strengthened their communities, reinforced their cultural values, and shaped their identity as a people. They didn't just survive the winter, they mastered it, using it as a way to connect with the past, honor the gods, and prepare for the future. As we move toward the final section of our journey, let us remember that the Vikings' ability to survive the cold was more than just a practical matter. It was an embodiment of their values, resilience, resourcefulness, and community. Their success in the cold was not just about tools, food. The Vikings didn't just endure the cold. They used it to fuel their spirit, strengthen their communities, and lay the foundation for a culture that would shape the course of history. As we approach the final stretches of our journey into Viking survival through the coldest nights, we must take a step back and look at the cultural significance of winter in Viking society. It was far more than just a season. It was a time of reflection, renewal, and preparation. The Vikings viewed winter not as a threat, but as a cyclical part of life, a time when the challenges they faced would help them grow stronger, both as individuals and as a society. The cold was, in many ways, a test that proved their resilience and reinforced the values they held dear. Viking life, particularly during the winter months, was shaped by a deep connection to their gods and their environment. Their belief in the divine forces that governed nature gave them a sense of purpose and direction, even in the most difficult conditions. In a world where survival was never guaranteed, their faith in the gods gave them the strength to endure the harshest winters, knowing that they were not alone in their struggles. Whether it was the god Aller, who watched over their winter travels, or Skadi, who embodied the power of the cold. The Vikings had a spiritual framework that helped them navigate the darkest, coldest months. The rituals and sacrifices they performed during the winter months were more than just acts of devotion. They were part of the Vikings' strategy for survival. These practices helped to create a sense of unity within the community, reinforcing the bonds between family members, neighbors, and leaders. In many ways, winter served as a unifying force, bringing the Vikings together in shared rituals, communal feasts, and collective efforts to prepare for the coming year. This unity was vital for survival, as it ensured that no one was left behind and that everyone contributed to the well-being of the group. Winter also provided the Vikings with the opportunity to reflect on their past, honor their ancestors, and look ahead to the future. The long nights were a time to revisit the sagas, share stories of past victories and hardships, and pass down knowledge from one generation to the next. Honor and determination that was essential for surviving the coldest months. In the broader context, the winter months also gave the Vikings a chance to pause and regroup. The cold forced them to slow down, to focus on what was essential, and to plan for the future. With fewer opportunities for raiding or farming, winter became a time for repair and preparation. They would mend their weapons, reinforce their shelters, and prepare for the warmer months when their efforts would once again be focused on conquest and expansion. Winter was a time of rest, yes, but it was also a time of laying the groundwork for future success. The way the Vikings managed the harshest season of the year reflects their broader cultural mindset. They didn't simply endure difficulties, they saw challenges as opportunities for growth, reflection, and self-improvement. The cold wasn't something to run from, it was something to confront head-on with ingenuity, resilience, and a deep sense of community. This mindset, forged in the coldest nights, allowed them to face not only winter, but the many other challenges they encountered in their lives. As we conclude our exploration of Viking winter survival, let's consider how their approach to the cold influenced their greater accomplishments. The Vikings didn't just survive the harshest winters. They used their winters as a testing ground for innovation, resilience, and social unity. These same values helped them conquer new lands, build vast empires, and create a legacy that would echo through history. The cold that defined their world didn't diminish them, made them who they were, resilient, resourceful, and unyielding in their determination to thrive, no matter what the world threw at them. The legacy of Viking survival in the coldest nights is a story of adaptation, unity, and strength, a reminder that even in the darkest, coldest months, there is the potential for growth and renewal. The Vikings turned their winters into a time of preparation, reflection, and hope, and it is this enduring spirit that continues to captivate our imaginations. They didn't just survive the cold, they mastered it, and in doing so, they created a culture that would leave a lasting mark on the world. As we near the conclusion of this exploration into Viking survival during the coldest nights, we are left with one final element to examine: the lasting impact of Vikings culture on future generations, particularly in how they handled the harsh realities of winter. The Vikings, known for their fierce warriors and epic voyages, were also pioneers in adapting to extreme conditions. Their ability to face winter's challenges wasn't just about endurance, it was about harnessing the environment to fuel their growth, creativity, and expansion. And their legacy, in many ways, is built upon these very traits. Viking society was deeply rooted in a respect for their environment. The land, the weather, and the gods were all interconnected in their worldview. During the winter months, this interconnectedness became even more apparent. The Vikings viewed the cold as something to respect and even honor, and in doing so, they were able to adapt and flourish. They didn't resist winter. They understood it, accepted it, and found ways to thrive within it. Their ability to see the winter months not as an obstacle, but as a time for reflection, community building, and preparation shows just how deeply their relationship with the natural world influenced their survival strategies. The coldest nights didn't just shape their survival, they shaped their culture. The Vikings' resourcefulness in the face of winter was built into the very fabric of their identity. Their reliance on communal efforts, the spiritual connection to the gods, and the value placed on mental toughness all played a role in how they navigated the most challenging months of the year. And this influence carried over into the broader Viking way of life. When the Vikings set sail for distant lands, whether in search of plunder, trade, or new territory, they took with them not just physical tools, but the mindset of adaptability and resilience. Their experience in the cold had prepared them for the unknowns of the wider world. The harsh winter months honed their ability to plan, innovate, and cooperate, all of which were vital to their success as explorers and conquerors. The Vikings' legacy can be seen in the cultures that followed them, as their influence spread across Europe and beyond. Many of the qualities that defined Viking survival resourcefulness, unity, respect for nature, and spiritual strength became embedded in the societies they interacted with. Even today, the Viking spirit of resilience, forged in the coldest months, continues to inspire. Their stories of bravery and endurance against the elements remind us that hardship, no matter how difficult, can be transformed into an opportunity for growth and innovation. And while the Vikings themselves may have lived long ago, the lessons they imparted remain timeless. They showed us that survival is about more than just enduring it. It's about finding ways to thrive in the face of adversity, whether through their exceptional craftsmanship, their ability to work together as a community, or their unwavering belief in their own strength. The Vikings turned winter from a threat into a powerful ally. Looking at the world today, we still find echoes of Viking resilience in how we face challenges. When the cold winds blow, when resources run low, or when the nights seem too long, it's the Viking spirit that reminds us to keep pushing forward, to adapt, to innovate, and to never give up. The Vikings may have mastered the cold, but their true legacy lies in how they showed us that we can master the challenges that life throws at us, no matter how harsh. As we close this chapter on Viking winter survival, let us carry with us the knowledge that resilience isn't just about enduring the difficult moments. It's about using those moments to grow stronger. The Vikings didn't just survive the cold, they mastered it, and in doing so, they created a lasting legacy of courage, unity, and adaptability that still resonates today. As we reach the final section of our exploration into Viking survival through the coldest nights, we can now reflect on the incredible legacy of the Vikings and how their approach to the harshest winters continues to resonate in the modern world. The Vikings were not only survivors of the extreme cold, they were masters of adaptation, building a culture that turned adversity into opportunity. Through their resilience, resourcefulness, and strong community bonds, the Vikings proved that hardship, when faced with ingenuity and strength, can become a defining feature of a society's greatness. The Vikings' ability to thrive during winter is not merely a testament to their survival instincts. It is a reflection of their deep understanding of life's cycles. They knew that winter was not permanent, it was part of a natural rhythm that would eventually give way to the renewal of spring. This cyclical view of life, where even the harshest periods are seen as a phase to endure and overcome, was crucial to their success. Their deep respect for the land, the seasons, and the gods shaped a worldview that helped them not just survive, but thrive. This understanding of the cold seasons influenced more than just their survival strategies, influenced their entire way of life. The Vikings took lessons from the winter and applied them to every aspect of their culture. They valued resilience, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. They knew that to survive winter, the entire community needed to come together. From the young to the old, everyone had a role to play. Whether it was gathering firewood, maintaining the hearth, preparing food, or sharing stories. The winter months cemented the importance of family, community, and shared resources in Viking society. The Vikings' strong communal bonds were integral to their survival, and it is these bonds that allowed them to conquer not just the cold, but the challenges of everyday life. By fostering a culture where survival was a collective effort, the Vikings were able to create a system that ensured their survival in one of the harshest climates on Earth. They didn't just endure, they conquered, expanding their territories and influence far beyond Scandinavia. Their success as a seafaring, exploratory people was built upon the foundation of their ability to adapt, cooperate, and remain resilient during the most challenging seasons. Even today, we see the lasting influence of the Viking approach to winter and survival. In times of hardship, we look to the Vikings as an example of how to endure and persevere. Their ability to face adversity, both physically and mentally, has inspired generations to adopt the same mindset. The idea that winter, or any difficult time, is simply a phase to survive and learn from, is as relevant now as it was in Viking times. The Vikings understood that winter was a time for reflection, for regrouping, and for preparing for the future. It was a time to celebrate, share stories, and strengthen the ties that bound them together as a people. And as the seasons changed and the cold gave way to the warmth of spring, they were ready to face the challenges of the new year with renewed strength and unity. As we conclude this journey into the world of Viking winter survival, we can see that their success was just about enduring the cold. It was about thriving in it. The Vikings mastered the art of adaptation, resourcefulness, and community, turning the coldest nights into a proving ground for their strength and resilience. Their legacy is not just one of survival, it's one of thriving through adversity, of turning hardship into opportunity, and of building a culture that continues to inspire today. The lessons of Viking winter survival are timeless. They remind us that when we face difficulties, we should approach them with resilience, adaptability, and a sense of unity. The Vikings didn't let the cold define them. They defined how to face the cold. And in doing so, they left a legacy of courage and endurance that continues to inspire and guide us through the challenges we face today.